Chapter 44. According to Zheng Jin's plan, the exploration team had to rest for 2 more days. It took a lot of effort to build this camp, and it would be a waste if they didn't make good use of it. The surroundings were cleared again, and the flying rats were hunted. The only threat was gone, so it was very safe. The bodies of the flying rats needed to be processed. The archery of the members of the exploration team also needed to be practiced hard. In addition, they had used up a lot of arrows and a small number of short bows in the previous hunt, and they all needed to be replenished. The hunt was a great success, and the situation of the entire exploration team was greatly improved. Now, Zheng Jin had enough time to build better long-range weapons. However, after thorough consideration, Zheng Jin rationally gave up on this idea. The next day, Song Su met Zheng Jin. "Lord Zheng Jin, I have good news. I've made a new discovery." Oh, Zheng Jin knew that Song Su was studying the body of the black ironhead rat. "Did you find a magic crystal in the body of the rat?" Song Su shook his head with a smile. "This black ironhead rat doesn't have a magic crystal, and the magic power in its body is also very mixed. Soon after it died, the magic power dissipated." Zheng Jin muttered, "The black ironhead rat doesn't have a magic crystal, but I do have one in my body." Song Su didn't keep him in suspense and said frankly, "It's like this, my lord. I cut open the stomach of the black ironhead rat and found that it had just eaten a full meal before it died. Therefore, there is still a lot of food in its stomach that hasn't been digested, including meat, bones, feathers, fruits, grass, and so on. Among them, I also found a kind of potato." Zheng Jin's eyes flashed slightly. "It seems that this kind of flying rat is omnivorous. We could try to dig up this kind of potato." Song Su nodded. "My lord, it's not just the potato. I speculate that there may be a lot of food stored in the nest of the flying rats." "Why do you think so?" asked Zheng Jin. "Through the previous dissection, as well as the recent research on these rat corpses, I found that their digestive ability is very strong. Their gastric juices can even slightly corrode swords. Generally speaking, when these creatures with strong digestive abilities were hungry, their gastric acid secretion would make it very difficult for them to endure. In order to resist this hunger, they would swallow things that were temporarily difficult to digest, such as stones and so on. However, these flying squirrels did not have such a thing in their stomachs. This means that they have plenty of food. We've basically scouted the surroundings. I believe that not only are these flying squirrels omnivorous, but they also have the ability to store food like squirrels. Normally, they would explore everywhere and search for food. When they are unable to endure the hunger, they can eat quickly to prevent the entire race from being driven mad by hunger." "Very good." Zheng Jin patted Song Su's shoulder to express his appreciation. "I'll leave this matter to Lan Zhao. Sir, please allow me to follow you. I am very interested in the specific structure of the flying squirrel nest." Song Su made a small request at the right time. "Sure." Zheng Jin agreed without any hesitation. Although more manpower was needed to protect this old scholar, ever since Zheng Jin came into contact with Song Su, he had repeatedly received help from the old scholar. If the situation allowed, Zheng Jin did not mind satisfying the old scholar's desire for knowledge. When Song Su returned to the camp, he had a satisfied expression on his face. Their harvest also gave Jin Zhen a pleasant surprise. Just as Song Su had guessed, the flying squirrel nest was indeed stocked with food. Moreover, the food storage was very large. So much so that when the exploration team members searched the house, many of them sighed. These flying squirrels were living better lives than humans. Although most of the food could not be eaten by humans. However, the amount of potatoes, tree fruits, and so on was equivalent to 1/3 of the flying squirrel meat. This was a great supplement to the exploration team's food. ZD had also made some new progress in her research. Using the gastric juices of the flying squirrels, ZD created many corrosive acid agents. After iron swords were stained with this agent, they would be unrecognizable in a few breaths. As long as there was enough agent, a large hole would be corroded in the soil in just a few breaths. If combined with an atomizing agent, it could create a strong corrosive acid mist. If an ordinary person was exposed to it, their lungs would die after just breathing for a moment. Although the hunting of the flying squirrels was a great success, it consumed the only combustion-promoting agent in ZD's hands. This corrosive agent became a supplement, giving the exploration team an additional means to fight against the enemy. Of course, whether it was the flaming agent from before or the corrosive acid agent now, they were not magic potions. They only used, purified, and strengthened the original physical properties of the materials. The effect of magic potions was more obvious. However, on this island, low-level magic potions were ineffective. There was no progress in the field of acupuncture. He could only temporarily give up his original train of thought and change his direction. He began to think, how did the mysterious crystal core in his heart come about? Is it a potion? This was the answer that Junjin thought was most likely. Otherwise, why were these two mutations related to the monkey-tailed brown bear? As night fell, Junjin called ZD and once again asked indirectly about the situation at that time. ZD's answer did not give Junjin any new gains. Jin is lost in thought. If ZD had an accident when she was saving me and formed this crystal core, then it would have been impossible for her to escape. Then, when I took the potion, it might trigger the crystal core again and cause a mutation. What's going on? Or do you think there are any hidden dangers? ZD asked. Nothing, I just want to understand. Jin smiled and comforted ZD. It's getting late. We have to set off tomorrow. Go back and have a good rest. ZD nodded, her eyes shining. Lord Jin, with you, I believe we will be able to leave this island. Jin nodded. Not only do we have to leave this island, but we also have to do our best to win people's hearts and gather some people to form a preliminary team. Otherwise, when we come a White Sand City, it will only be the two of us, and it will be difficult to compete with the other two for the position of City Lord. Don't blame yourself, ZD. In fact, you have done very well this time. ZD was slightly stunned and laughed bitterly. My lord, your eyes are really sharp. To be honest, I hate the environment here. This place is too unfriendly to mages. The only thing I can help you with is potions. But the current conditions are too simple. If I had some alchemy tools, I believe I could have concocted a poison against the flying squirrels in time. Jin sighed. That's the truth. We have been reduced to this strange island, surrounded by danger. We are trying to survive, and anything can happen. We just need to do our best, and that's all we can do. Good night. Good night. ZD left. Jin still didn't tell ZD the truth. On the one hand, Jin didn't want ZD to bear more worry, and she was already blaming herself. Although they had only known each other for a short time, Jin found that this purple-eyed girl had a pride in her heart. For such a person, Jin only needed to comfort and didn't need to reprimand or whip her. This was because she didn't need any external pressure, and this kind of person could work hard on her own. On the other hand, Jin also knew ZD's strength in the field of potions. Even if he exposed the truth, ZD didn't have the ability to solve this problem. Since he had hidden it from ZD the first time, Jin didn't mind hiding it a second time. In Jin's view, the ability of the mysterious crystal core was a trump card that could allow him to deal with dangerous situations and strong enemies. But at the same time, it also had a huge hidden danger. Is this mutation harmful or not? How can a person's heart have a crystal core? Will this kind of external organ be repelled by other tissues in the body? What kind of damage will a sudden mutation cause to me? Will it be a physical disability or a bloodline disorder? I can't sense the crystal core, and the mutation is not under control. Could it be because the crystal core has just grown and hasn't completely merged with my body? If the mutation happens too many times, will it turn me into a beast and make me lose all my humanity? It wasn't just his body and bloodline, but also the entire exploration team. Jin knew that the reason why he could lead this group of people was because he was strong. Firstly, it was because he was strong enough. Secondly, it was because of his identity. He was a noble, and more importantly, he was a holy knight. The latter identity was more inspiring than the former. If Zhang Jin's mutation was discovered and he was regarded as a monster, then the advantage brought by this identity would be greatly weakened. Although the hunting of the rats was successful, Zhang Jin knew that this success was only reining in the horse at the edge of the cliff and pulling the exploration team back from the edge of destruction. The following journey would definitely encounter difficulties and obstacles. It was hard to say whether the exploration team could cope with these hardships and tests. Zhang Jin didn't want the hearts of this small team to waver. Therefore, he chose to suppress this secret in his heart and prevent the possibility of it spreading from the source. Late at night in the forest, it was not peaceful. The howls of wild beasts were often heard. These sounds were strange. Some were indeed howling, some were whimpering, and some were like dry coughs. Zhang Jin knew that he needed to rest well. After all, he had to set off early the next morning. However, he lay on the mattress and couldn't fall asleep for a while. He simply summarized the results of his thinking these days. At present, it seems that there are three major possibilities for triggering the mutation of the body. The first is the pressure of being on the verge of death, triggering the instinctive reaction of the crystal core in my heart. The second is that under great pressure, I have all kinds of intense emotions. The third is the blood-based medicine. The heart crystal core is very likely caused by the medicine. Although the two mutations didn't absorb the external medicine, there may still be remnants in the body. Zhang Jin sighed faintly. Although he thought of a lot, the current situation made him not dare to try any of the possibilities. On the one hand, he didn't have a guarantee of safety. On the other hand, he shouldered responsibilities and couldn't easily take risks. He had to lead the entire exploration team, protect his fiancée, and revitalize the 100 Needles family. He had a lot of things to do. In addition, after the mutation, the heart crystal core will consume a lot of magic. After that, I will have a very strong sense of emptiness and exhaustion. Full of thoughts, Zhang Jin drowsily fell asleep. After falling asleep, the young man's eyebrows were still slightly wrinkled, as if he was thinking hard in his dream. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly with a bang, the whole tent collapsed. Zhang Jin was the first to wake up. Although he was sleeping in the camp, he still kept a vigilant heart, so he quickly reacted. Why did the tent suddenly collapse? What happened? Zhang Jin picked up the spider blade that was placed beside him and waved it fiercely. The sharp blade easily cut open the collapsed tent, allowing Zhang Jin to observe everything outside. The next moment, his body and mind shook, and his face showed a look of horror. Chapter 45. The strong wind roared in his ears, like a herd of beasts roaring in unison. The sand that filled the sky was swept up by the strong wind, slapping Zhang Jin's face like knives. The huge wind pulled in all directions, sometimes left and sometimes right, sometimes up and sometimes down. It was difficult for ordinary people to stand still. Zhang Jin's feet were no longer solid grass, but sand. There was sand all over the ground. Sand was also flying in the air. The lush forest was completely gone. This was a desert in the middle of the night. In the desert, the strong wind roared, and sand flew all over the sky. The exploration team members in the camp let out panic cries. Zhang Jin was stunned for a moment, and then he reacted. His heart was shocked, and two words appeared in his mind. Teleportation. The teleportation has been activated again. This time, we have all been teleported to the desert. When Zhang Jin experienced the first teleportation, he was being chased by a swarm of poisonous fire bees. After the teleportation was activated, he was teleported from the rainforest to the forest, indirectly saving his life. This was the second teleportation he had experienced. Just like the first time, it was silent. There was no sign before the teleportation. But this time, Zhang Jin's luck was too bad. Not only was he teleported to the desert, but he also happened to encounter a sandstorm. We have to gather everyone. Zhang Jin opened his mouth to call out, but his mouth was immediately filled with sand. Zhang Jin had no choice but to cover his mouth and shout, but his shout was covered by the wind. The wind became stronger. The sand hit Zhang Jin's body, and waves of numb and slight pain kept coming. The bad weather became terrifying. Sandstorm? Realizing this, Jin's heart instantly fell to the bottom. ZD, wait for me. He had no choice but to stop shouting and run forward according to his memory. With a whoosh, a tent flew towards Jin along with the wind cover. It was like a gray ghost monster pouncing down from above in the dark night. With a wave of his hand, Jin's extremely sharp blade cut the tent into two halves. The two halves flew past Jin's body from the left and right, and were immediately swept away by the strong wind and disappeared without a trace. The tents in these camps were all fixed to the ground with wooden stakes. However, after they were teleported over, the stakes that were originally deeply embedded in the soil were scattered on the surface of the desert. Without any support, the tent collapsed and was swept away by the strong wind. Oh no! Jin cursed inwardly. After a while, he realized that he couldn't determine the correct direction at all. First of all, when they were teleported here, there was no point of reference to distinguish north from south in the middle of the night. Secondly, the tents were flying everywhere, and the original layout of the camp had changed beyond recognition. Finally, they couldn't rely on shouting to contact the other team members in the sandstorm. Jin was also at a loss for a moment. Moreover, in just a few short breaths, the wind had doubled. Save me! Jin heard a weak cry for help coming from above his head. He raised his head abruptly and saw a black shadow flashing above his head. Jin immediately realized that one of the exploration team members had been blown away by the hurricane. The wind increased and became very terrifying. It could easily blow an adult away. Jin subconsciously stretched out his arm, but in the blink of an eye, the exploration team member who was crying for help disappeared into the sandstorm. It was too late. ZD is the lightest. Her situation is too dangerous. Jin thought of this and couldn't help but feel anxious. ZD, where are you now? As if responding to Jin's strong inner voice, a white light suddenly lit up in the sandstorm on his left front. The white light was like a fire, burning fiercely in his dim vision. On this island, low-level magic and battle chi were prohibited. According to Jin's understanding of the exploration team, this white flame could only be produced by a potion, and the location of the white flame was obviously ZD's true location. Smart. Jin couldn't help but praise in his heart. He immediately stared at the location of the white flame and ran. It was very strenuous for him to run. The terrifying wind could blow an adult away. However, Jin was a battle chi cultivator after all. Although he couldn't use battle chi now, his battle chi cultivation made his physical fitness extraordinary. Under such circumstances, Jin could still barely resist the wind. However, as he gradually approached, the white flame suddenly dissipated. Is the potion ineffective? ZD, wait for me. Jin's head shook slightly, and he became more and more anxious. He continued to take a few steps forward. With a whoosh, a huge object seemed to be attacking him in the dim vision. The youth hurriedly lowered his head to avoid this object. It turned out to be a rather large tree trunk. There were indeed some tree trunks stored in the camp, which were left over for making short bows and so on. The tree trunk was far heavier than an adult, but now was easily swept away by the strong wind. Jin couldn't run anymore. He had to stomp down hard with every step he took, until his feet were submerged in the sand, until his ankles were submerged. Only then could he resist the wind. What troubled him more was not the hurricane, but the sand that came whistling in the wind. These sand hit Jin's body and face, bringing about an obvious synesthesia. Jin couldn't open his eyes completely to avoid being blinded. He could only squint a little to observe. The surroundings became even darker. There was no trace of light. He couldn't even see his fingers if he stretched out his hand. Jin could only move forward based on his memory. He had no confidence in whether the direction was correct or not. The power of nature was so vast and majestic. At this moment, the youth deeply felt how small he was. As time passed, Jin's heart turned cold. I've walked at least 100 steps, but I still haven't found ZD. Has she been swept away by the strong wind, or have I unconsciously gone in the wrong direction? God, Shengming Emperor, what should I do? Hesitation and blankness, like a cloud of black smoke, choked the youth's nose and eyes. And in the youth's chest, there seemed to be a burning flame. That was the flame of anger, unwillingness, and hatred. I've already controlled the exploration team. It's not easy to hunt successfully and have enough food for the time being. In the blink of an eye, it has become like this. Am I supposed to die on this island? Should I just watch the people who are close to me die one by one? Is the fall of the 100 Needles family in front of me? No! How can I let this happen? The youth was filled with righteous indignation and tried his best. However, that formless fate was like a high and mighty godly king in the heavens. Occasionally, when it saw a needle, it was like it had discovered a rebellious ant. Fate would extend its mountain-like finger and press down. Jean wanted to raise his head, but his head was getting lower and lower. Jean wanted to straighten his body, but he had to bend down and bend his body to move forward slowly. Jean wanted to stare angrily, wanted to shout or scream, but he could only move forward with his eyes closed in the roaring darkness. The wind was still rapidly increasing. Soon, it became so big that Jean had to resist it with all his strength. The youth sadly realized that at this moment, he could no longer save anyone, because his own life was in imminent danger. He wanted to urge his fighting power, but he still failed. He wanted to mutate again, but no matter how crazily he tried, he couldn't sense the crystal core in his heart. He didn't succeed. Helplessly, he could only pray to God. My great Shengming Emperor, you are a walking God. Now your believer is in a desperate situation, and the glory of the nights is about to be drowned by the wind and sand. Please listen, please take pity on me and help me get out of this predicament, so that I can continue to follow your path and show your power. But God didn't respond. The youth was angry. The youth struggled. The youth was sad. The youth struggled. The youth was exhausted and eventually fell unconscious. It was an endless darkness. A mysterious bestial roar caused the young man to regain a trace of consciousness. Where am I? Where is this? Who am I? It was darkness. No one answered him. There was only endless darkness. Wait, I think I just heard the roar of a beast. Immediately, the youth gradually remembered his identity as a Templar knight and a noble. His name was Jean, his fiancée ZD, the dangerous island, the exploration team, the midnight teleportation, the violent and terrifying sandstorm. Along with this process, the youth's consciousness fully recovered, and he finally woke up completely. Then, he felt a heavy pressure squeezing his whole body from all directions, making it difficult for him to breathe. So, I'm afraid I'm buried in the sand. Horror naturally crept into his heart. No one would be willing to be buried alive like this. Jean became extremely nervous, but he didn't immediately open his eyes, nor did he rush to get up. Instead, he calmly sensed. His fighting power cultivation didn't just make him stronger than others, it also made him more perceptive. He could see farther and clearer than others, and hear more and more carefully than others. Although he couldn't see now, and the loudest sound he could hear was his heartbeat, he could feel which direction the pressure was stronger. Then he gathered all his strength and struggled with his limbs. He struggled with all his might. He struggled with all his might, because the youth knew that this was his last chance to survive. Chapter 46. A Sea of Yellow Sand. It was silent and windless. The sun hung high in the sky, wantonly spreading boundless heat and light. The sand dunes were connected to each other, rising and falling like unique tombstones. And at the back of a sand dune, there was suddenly a rustling sound of sand rolling down. This movement became louder and louder, and then a hand suddenly shot out from the stirring yellow sand. This hand was covered in blood and bruises. It suddenly grabbed empty air and seemed to be stunned for a moment. Then, in the next moment, the hand seemed to react excitedly and crazily grabbing and scratching. First, it was the palm, then the arm. Sand gushed out, and the hole in the sand quickly expanded, finally revealing a young man's head. When this dusty head was half out of the sand dune, he desperately opened his mouth as wide as possible, weakly exhaling all the stuffiness in his chest, and then greedily inhaling the scorching hot air. Accompanied by violent breathing, a small amount of sand was ejected from the young man's mouth and nose. Cough, cough, cough. Then, because the breathing was too violent, the young man coughed violently. After coughing for a while, the young man finally recovered and opened his eyes. Even though he was behind the dark sand dune, his pupils still shrank from the scorching sun, and he subconsciously narrowed his eyes into slits. Seeing the surrounding environment clearly, the young man's heart sank, even though he had expected it. Desert. I really am in a desert. But I don't know if this desert is the same as the one Song Su and the others went to before. The young man was Jinjin. He had almost suffocated to death. When he took the first breath of air, the most dangerous moment was finally over. Jinjin panted for a moment, recovered a little strength, and pulled himself out of the yellow sand with difficulty. After officially escaping the predicament of being buried alive, Jinjin did not have the strength to stand up and directly knelt on the ground, gasping for breath and coughing loudly at intervals. He spat. The sand in his mouth dyed his saliva a light yellow. He picked his ears, snorted, and then shook his hair with his hands, scattering the fine sand everywhere. These movements only lasted for a short while before Jinjin felt that his physical strength had reached its limit. He was so scared that he immediately stopped and went from a full kneeling position to a half-kneeling position. Because he knew how dangerous this island was, it was absolutely stupid to exhaust all of his physical strength. Besides, the half-kneeling action would allow him to get up quickly. The surroundings were completely silent. There was not even a hint of wind. The bright sunlight was scorching hot, baking the yellowish-brown desert. The desert, on the other hand, was plain and unremarkable. There was only yellow in sight, not a single trace of green. The only impurity was him. This golden-haired youth was no longer as handsome as he used to be, nor was he clean. His face was covered in dirt, and he was in an extremely sorry state. Jinjin watched everything in front of him with extreme vigilance. However, he didn't make any movements. He scanned his surroundings and finally fixed his gaze on the sand dune behind him. He looked at the sand dune and felt like he was looking at a silent tombstone. Jinjin was both scared and relieved. Although he was buried deep under the sand, he was not directly under the sand dune. He was not buried too deeply, which gave him a chance to escape. He tightly grasped this chance and didn't die under the sand dune tombstone. Therefore, the youth couldn't help but laugh. Ha ha, cough cough, ha. He had already escaped danger for a while. When he confirmed that he was safe, his heart started to surge with joy. This feeling of joy grew stronger and stronger. In the next few breaths, it was so strong that it filled the youth's chest. Jinjin's laughter grew louder and louder. He even laughed until tears came out. He once again felt the beauty of life. He felt the preciousness of every breath. Just now, in the sand, he couldn't breathe at all. He felt that his body was numb and in pain. There were injuries in some places, and at least one of his ribs was broken. This caused Jinjin's chest to rise and fall with pain when he breathed. But it was this pain that made him extremely happy. This was the joy of surviving a disaster. The joy of being alive was simply endless. It was like a huge wave set off by a tsunami that wanted to drown him. In fact, Jinjin had already experienced this feeling of surviving a disaster many times. The first time, strictly speaking, was when he had just woken up. Jinjin's battle consciousness had helped him indirectly kill the silver-level magical beast Blue Wolf. Everything happened too quickly. Of course, after the event, Jinjin also felt all kinds of emotions. But there were more feelings of relief and fear than joy. The second time was in the cave. Jinjin had already been poisoned by the fire poison, but he risked his life to kill the silver-level magical beast monkey-tail brown bear. Jinjin was almost dead. ZD tried her best to save him. Struggling between life and death, Jinjin fainted and woke up several times. In the end, he survived. At that time, he discovered that even an ordinary wildflower was full of life's infinite cuteness and beauty. He could appreciate it for a long time. The third time was when he faced the blade spider. As death approached, Zhang Jin's attention was still attracted by the sudden emergence of memories. Zhang Jin also thought that he was going to die. He did not expect his body to suddenly mutate. After surviving this calamity, he was more suspicious and curious than anything else. The fourth time was when a mutton's chaotic magic invaded his body and almost killed him. After being saved, the youth's heart was more grateful and appreciative of his fiancée ZD. The fifth time was the disaster before his eyes. After narrowly escaping death, Zhang Jin's joy was the greatest ever. Why is it? Zhang Jin carefully tasted his own emotions. Soon he found the reason. It's because this ordeal is the power of heaven and earth. If I was poisoned or a magical beast, I would still have the ability to help. But in the face of such a violent sandstorm, what else could I do other than take a beating? It's my fortune to be able to survive. If he had a choice, Zhang Jin would rather face a magical beast than a sandstorm that covered the sky. It was this feeling of powerlessness and helplessness that made his joy after surviving even more intense. My life was hanging by a thread. It's my fortune to be able to survive. What about ZD, Song Su, and the others? A question surfaced in Zhang Jin's mind, causing the smile on his face to gradually disappear. His emotions comforted him. These people must still be alive. But at the same time, reason coldly told Zhang Jin, these people were probably doomed. If they survived, it was tantamount to a miracle. Zhang Jin could not help but worry, but also feel empty and hopeful. His joy seemed to have suddenly faded. It was so intense just now, but now it disappeared almost instantly without a trace. What followed was unwillingness. Under the leadership of Zhang Jin, the exploration team had finally hunted down a group of rats. They had just gotten a little better when they suffered a fatal blow. It was fear. If he faced the violent sandstorm again, would he have the luck to escape a second time? It was helplessness and confusion. What should he do next? Where should he go? It was heavy. He once swore to himself that he would protect his fiancée well. Now, was ZD alive or dead? If she was dead, where was her body? And as the only heir of the Hundred Needles clan, he needed to compete to win the position of the Lord of White Sand City. But now he was trapped on the island, on the verge of death several times. Could he still escape the island alive? Could he still have the opportunity to shoulder the heavy burden of revitalizing the clan? All kinds of emotions tangled together, making Zhang Jin feel that it was difficult to breathe again. At this moment, he felt helpless and weak. He wanted to hold back his tears. He remembered his identity as a knight of the temple, but his tears still fell silently. Instead of wiping away his tears, Zhang Jin watched the tears drip onto the dry sand. He watched the tears soak into the sand and make tiny pits. The tears tried to expand, but the wetness was limited to a very small area. Compared to the vast desert, compared to the entire sand dune, these tears were so small, so pitiful. It's like me. Zhang Jin sighed bitterly. He once again prayed from the bottom of his heart. God, my great Shengming Emperor, you are the living God. You are the side of eternal victory. At this moment, your knight, your believer, your child prays for your response, prays for your mercy, prays for you to give me the right direction, to show me the way to bravely move forward. This time, Zhang Jin was long-winded, and the content was unprecedentedly abundant. A highly poisonous desert viper found Zhang Jin, and the poor boy was soon regarded as prey. The desert viper quietly approached. Its scales were very close to the color of sand, and its S-shaped movement was not only fast but also silent. When the distance was close, the desert viper suddenly shot out from behind Zhang Jin. But the next moment, Zhang Jin did not look back, but stretched out his hand and caught the viper in midair. The viper's mouth was wide open, and the snake's tongue was stretched out. It struggled madly, but its throat was tightly gripped by Zhang Jin's hand. The viper's half-a-meter-long body was tightly wrapped around Jinjin's arm. But Jinjin did not move. Whether it was his half-kneeling body or his arm, they were like cast iron. Jinjin no longer prayed, but quietly listened to the last hiss of the viper's life journey. He was silent and did not raise his head, so when the viper was forcibly strangled to death, it did not see the face of its mortal enemy. The sun rose higher and higher. The surface of the desert was boiling, and the air in the distance was scorched and distorted. A golden-haired boy slowly walked out from the back of the sand dune, like a drop of water flowing into the vast and boundless desert. The boy's face was handsome, but at the moment, his face was covered in dust and his clothes were tattered. On his shoulder was a dead desert viper, as if it was hanging on a chain. This viper was different from the usual ones. Its tail was like a spiral, reminiscent of a metal spring made of goblins. On this godforsaken island, even an ordinary snake looked strange. Jinjin did not shed any more tears, and his face became expressionless. He knew a truth. God may have mercy, knights may have mercy, and humans may have mercy, but nature did not. Chapter 47. The scorching sunlight was like thousands of sharp arrows, falling from the sky and covering the entire desert. Jinjin walked under the sunlight and felt like a fish on a heated iron plate. In order to avoid being roasted, he could only try his best to walk away from the sun on the sand dunes. Even so, after walking for a while, he felt a severe physical exhaustion. At the same time, a sense of hunger faintly transmitted to him. Jinjin licked his lips. His lips were so dry that it was difficult for him to swallow. His mouth was dry. Jinjin was as silent as iron. He took the initiative to slow down and walk forward while calculating the time. Because he was unconscious, he did not know how much time had passed. But I haven't eaten or drunk anything for at least 1 night and half a day. It's normal to feel hungry and thirsty. Under normal circumstances, a person would definitely be hungry and thirsty if they did not eat for such a long time. Moreover, Jinjin had experienced a terrifying sandstorm. Going through this ordeal had consumed a lot of his physical and mental strength. The struggle between life and death had also caused a strong impact on his mental state. My only food now is this snake. Jinjin glanced at the snake corpse on his shoulder and silently thought about his situation. The island was ferocious. To survive in the wild, the situation was very grim. Previously, in the rainforest and forest, Jinjin had encountered danger several times. Now that he was in the desert, the resources here were very poor. In comparison, the rainforest and forest, which were rich in resources, was simply heaven. Fortunately, during this period, once I have time, I will ask Song-Su for advice and know many ways to survive in the desert. Because he did not understand the mechanism of teleportation, Jinjin had long considered that he might be sent to the desert in the future. For this, he had already made some preparations. It's best if I can find an oasis. I can immediately replenish a lot of water and food. It's also good to encounter a cactus, but I need a specific cactus. According to Song-Su, many cactus are inedible and contain poison. Moreover, digging cactus will consume a lot of physical strength and water in the body. If I do it blindly, the gains will not make up for the losses. The exploration team had also been teleported and ended up in the desert. They mainly relied on the food and water they brought with them. In this regard, Jinjin was not unprepared. Every day, he would carry a certain amount of food and water with him. Even when he slept in his tent at night, he would place food, water, weapons, and other important survival resources beside him. For the exploration team, led by Jinjin, the teleportation was silent and irresistible. The life forms or items around the teleported life form would also be teleported. Therefore, the entire expedition team had been sent into the desert together, and they did not leave behind their clothes, equipment, and so on. This time, the entire camp that Jinjin had ordered to be built was teleported over. However, no one had expected that after teleporting to the desert, they would be shrouded in a violent sandstorm. At that time, After Zhenjin was awakened, he only wanted to save people. He just grabbed his saber and ran out of the tent. Therefore, the food and water in the tents were all swept away and buried by the wind and sand. Zhenjin did not even have time to wear his original leather armor, and the weapon made of the spider's blade and spider's leg was only left with the one in his hand. Fortunately, even if I was unconscious, I still held onto the weapon tightly and did not let go. At least, I did not fall into the predicament of being unarmed again. But my food and water are basically gone. I should replenish these reserves. Without them, I can't live at all. An invisible pressure silently accumulated in the young man's heart. And soon, this pressure became stronger and stronger, as if there was a huge rock on his heart, and it was getting heavier and heavier. Zhenjin's breathing became shorter and shorter. This was definitely not just because of the scorching air in the desert, nor was it just because his physical strength was constantly declining. Surviving alone is completely different from before. The young man sighed deeply in his heart. He could not help but slowly stop in his tracks, stopping in the dark of a dune. He held his knees with both hands, giving himself a chance to breathe. How long had it been? Surviving alone had already made him feel that his entire body was slowly and involuntarily becoming nervous. A thick sense of loneliness firmly wrapped around him. He could not rely on anyone, and could not rely on anyone. He could only rely on himself. It was as if he was the only person left in the world, as if the entire human race had died out. He had to face all the difficulties and dangers alone. Perhaps I'll die here. My flesh will be eaten by predators, leaving only white bones behind. I'll suffer the scorching sun of day and the cold of night in the desolate desert. In the end, I'll be ground into pieces by the wind and sand, completely disappearing from this vast and cold world. Such similar thoughts constantly appeared in Zhenjin's mind. No matter how he tried to restrain himself, he could not stop. Traces of panic spread in his heart and quickly expanded. Zhenjin gritted his teeth, revealing a bitter smile. Song Su had once warned him. According to his research, humans were actually social animals. From the deepest part of their bodies, they needed the company of others. Once a person survived alone, especially when faced with the enormous pressure of surviving in the wild, it was easy for them to become nervous and panic. If not controlled, negative emotions would become a fatal killer. Even if there was enough food and water, and the surrounding environment was safe enough, it would still cause people to be unable to control their emotions, have a mental breakdown, have hallucinations, and become crazy. Now that the youth had experienced it himself, he recalled Song Su's theory and immediately had a very deep understanding. Calm down, don't panic. Zhenjin forced himself to calm down, but to no avail. God, my great emperor, you have the name of the sage. Your believer is here to pray to you. Please grant me the strength of my heart, so that I will no longer be weak and no longer panic. Let me bravely follow the path you have shown me, and let your name be known. He prayed to his God again, but the result did not surprise him at all. His God did not respond. He simply sat down on the sand. He looked at the endless desert, watching the monotonous yellow spread out and finally mixed with the blue sky. The scorching sun caused the air to distort crazily. The youth suddenly felt that the entire desert was like an incurable madman who appeared calm on the surface. Here, sooner or later, he would be melted and driven mad. Zhenjin, oh Zhenjin, how did you fall into this situation? How could you fall into this situation? You are the only heir of the 100 Needles family. You are the fiancé of Miss ZD, and you are here now. The youth angrily questioned himself. The situation was so bad that he could not even protect himself. But what could he do? Facing these self-blame, he could only remain silent. After a long time, the silent youth exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and said to himself, "Indeed, there is nothing worse than now, right?" Then he smiled bitterly. In fact, he himself found it strange that he could actually laugh under such circumstances. With this smile, the anger and panic in his heart dissipated a little, and a new feeling of sadness, helplessness, and self-mockery was added. Then, Miraculously, the youth, who was full of complicated emotions, slowly calmed down. Zhenjin, who calmed down, looked around and immediately realized that he had made a huge mistake before. He had paid too much attention to food and water before. He had randomly chosen a direction to go. In this desert, he was simply seeking his own death. Perhaps he had been too nervous at that time. So, this emotion filled his mind. He did not think much, and his body was forced to act directly. I should have found the right direction and kept it all the time. Without direction, my journey is likely to turn into a huge circle in the desert, which is worse than going around in the same place. It was noon in the daytime, and there were no stars or moon at night to guide the way. But Zhenjin had mastered another way, which was the way to identify the direction he had asked Song Su for advice. First, he inserted a stick into the ground and made a mark on the top of the stick's shadow on the ground. About 10 minutes later, he made another mark on the stick's shadow after the deviation. After the two marks were connected into a line, the perpendicular of the line was the north-south direction. As for which end of the bottom line was north or south, it depended on the position of the sun. At the position of the sun, the end of the perpendicular was south and the other end was north. Zhenjin did not know the topographic map of this island, but he clearly remembered that when the exploration team was teleported to the desert, Song Su had chosen the south direction. Therefore, without any other basis for judgment, he could only take a gamble this time and choose the south direction. Once again, Zhenjin tried his best to avoid the sun and walked behind the sand dunes. His speed decreased again and again, trying his best to conserve his strength. Many times, he took the initiative to stop and rest. I have to conserve my strength. Trekking in the desert during the day will consume a lot of strength. More importantly, after the body sweats, a lot of water will be consumed. The more you sweat, the closer you are to death. This was the precious knowledge that Zhenjin had learned when he and Song Su communicated. When Zhenjin remained calm, loneliness and the pressure of survival were also stimulating him, making his mind more agile and clear-headed. He recalled what Huang Zhao had said when he was communicating with her. At that time, I had just boarded the ship and was still a newbie. At the beginning, it was very difficult to endure. I worked on the deck all day and had a lot of work. I quickly got sunburned. At first, it was just an itch. I couldn't help but scratch it with my nails. Later, my skin and flesh became stinging, forming blisters that were tightly pressed together. I started to have a low fever, and my head was heavy all day. I could only lie weakly in the hammock every day. Then, the low fever became a high fever, and I started to stink. The other sailors didn't dare to approach me. Someone even suggested to the captain to throw me away, thinking that I had an epidemic and would infect others. Fortunately, my brother got some herbs from the local natives of the island when the ship docked. This herb was said to be made from sea mud and local leaves. After applying it, there was a cool feeling. It was very magical. In the end, I endured it. From then on, I didn't dare to underestimate the most ordinary sunlight. I also maintained the purest respect for these ancient medicines. When Zhenjin thought of this, he took off the outermost layer of clothes and tried to wrap it around his head. He was glad that his underwear was long-sleeved and long pants, which left him with very little exposed skin under the sun. Although my strength and physical fitness far exceed Huang Zhao's, this is not Phoenix Desert, and the possibility of sunburn is very low. But by doing so, I can maintain as much water in my body as possible. P.S. I recommend a good book. I am a killer of no feelings. The excellent writing of a great god. I am a killer of pigeons. I have no feelings. I also have no money. I am E. Haijo, surnamed E., the man who is proficient in half of the 4 great inventions. I don't want to talk to you, and I threw a B&G at you. Chapter 48. In the afternoon, the sun was not as hot as it was at noon, but it was still unbearable. A young man was slowly climbing to the top of a low sand dune. He was climbing from the back of the sand dune, clearly intending to climb over it. In his hand was a sword with a wooden hilt and a strange blade, full of a crude feeling. The young man was using the long sword as a crutch to help him move forward. The young man's figure was thin and not very robust. He was wearing linen underwear, trousers, and long sleeves, but his feet were bare. His head was covered with a layer of clothing, and his nose and mouth were tightly covered, but his eyes were exposed. At the same time, there was also the golden hair on his forehead. It was Junjin. The top of the sand dune was just a few steps away, and when the sun shone, Junjin could not help but squint his eyes. He deliberately exposed his eyes because he knew that he had to maintain a good vision. At the same time, he also used his hearing, smell, and touch to guard against predators that could attack at any time. The sun was very dazzling, and Junjin's squinted eyes were still dazzled by the sun's rays. Junjin did not directly go over, but stopped very close to the top of the sand dune and waited for his eyes to adjust before continuing to climb. Not finding any danger, Junjin stood at the top of the sand dune and looked into the distance. The desert in front of him was flat, unlike the many sand dunes behind him. The young man could not help but sigh. This meant that he would have to trudge through the torture of the sun. The young man's eyes were also very beautiful, with a dark blue color, like the sky after a rain. The confusion in his eyes disappeared in a flash, and then it was replaced by determination. "Keep going," Junjin said to himself. Suddenly, his blue eyes lit up. There's food. Having cultivated qi, his body was far stronger than ordinary people. He found that there was a spider not far away, rolling down the sand dune with the wind. Junjin hurried down and caught the spider without much effort. This spider was as big as 2 adult thumbs, and its body was yellowish-brown, similar to the color of the sand, but it was still discovered by Junjin's sharp eyes. The spider had 8 legs, but they were all curled up to form a ball. Then, with the wind, the spider could roll down the sand dune calmly. If he wanted it to walk on its own, it would take a lot more effort. In this barren desert, all life had their own unique survival skills. Saving physical strength was undoubtedly one of the most effective measures. Junjin pinched off the spider's head and shook his hands to shake off the sand on the spider's body. After that, he directly put the spider into his mouth and used his teeth to continuously chew it. After it became very fine, his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed it completely. Pinching off the little spider's head was to get rid of the poison. Of course, the aura of this little life form was weak. It was a far cry from a bronze-ranked creature. Even if it was poisonous, it would not be able to kill Junjin, who was at least a silver-ranked creature. However, the young man did not want to add any additional burden to his body. The spider didn't taste good. It wasn't roasted or seasoned. Junjin's mouth, throat, and nose were filled with a strange smell. The arthropods of the spider, on the other hand, tasted very simple, like withered branches. Junjin thought about it for a while. This kind of crispness was quite similar to that of other small insects. This little spider was not the first one he had eaten. Along the way, he had also encountered a few others sporadically. There were spiders, scorpions, and some he couldn't name. The spiders had their heads cut off, and the scorpions had their tails cut off. They all went into Junjin's stomach. Every time he ate, he would have the feeling of retching. However, he would never underestimate these little life forms. He knew very well that these little life forms were very important to replenish his water and food. After walking in the desert for half a day, Junjin had already discovered that he did not encounter any edible plants. However, it was easier to find some small life forms. These small life forms had very little meat. The most valuable thing was that they could replenish Junjin's water. Junjin treasured these foods very much. Although these droplets of food were very small, if they accumulated bit by bit, they might be what he relied on to successfully walk out of the desert in the future. If I don't treasure these foods, I might be able to successfully leave this place in the future. But in the end, I fell in the desert. I really hoped to encounter a cactus. Junjin sighed. Along the way, he had also encountered some sporadic plants. Unfortunately, there were no cactus. These plants were also small and short. Junjin did not know what species they were or whether they could be eaten. He had tried. After carefully avoiding the needle-like sharp branches and leaves, he found that the roots of the plants were deeply rooted in the desert. Such roots could allow the plants to absorb a little water from the desert's underground, but it also made it difficult for Zhenjin to dig them out. After Zhenjin tried, he decisively and wisely chose to give up. Even if he dug them out, the roots of this plant might not be food. Zhenjin did not know the species of this plant. Many times, he had to calculate the consumption and possible gains, patiently compare the results of the two, and then calmly think about it and make a decision. Obviously, the risk of digging up a plant that he did not know about was too great. In the end, Zhenjin chose to give up. This choice was actually very difficult. Every time he left a desert plant, Zhenjin would fall into a kind of doubt. Did I do something wrong? Perhaps this is a special arrangement by God to help me get out of this predicament. But I chose to give up. Zhenjin felt like he was a student in a college, doing a test that would determine his life and death. He kept answering questions, but no one gave him the correct answer. Time gradually passed, and the sun slowly set in the west. In the evening, the sun was like a rough man who vented his anger through violent fights. At this moment, his curses and beatings were weak, giving people the illusion of gentleness. The temperature in the air also became suitable, but it was still very dry. Zhenjin began to consciously quicken his pace. He needed to walk as much as possible at this time to make up for his previous losses. When the sun gradually set below the horizon, the afterglow of the setting sun and the sunset on the horizon looked very beautiful. But this kind of beautiful scenery was not appreciated by Zhenjin at all. He only felt that this was an ultimatum or warning from the sun. Kid, I will let you go for now. Tomorrow, I will continue to torture you. At this time, the temperature of the air dropped rapidly. Zhenjin began to feel that his clothes were thin, and a strong chill attacked him, making him shiver uncontrollably. The youth could not help but feel his heart sink. The temperature difference in this desert was very big, and it was beyond his previous estimation. For him, this was also a test. Although I can still bear it now, later on, when my body's condition deteriorates, this temperature difference will become a death threat to my neck. This was a possible threat in the future. What the youth wanted to solve the most now was hunger and thirst. The feeling of hunger and thirst was more serious than when he had just woken up. How could the small creatures he found along the way fill Zhenjin's stomach? In fact, rather than calling it food, it was more like a kind of comfort. Fortunately, Gene Needles did not encounter any powerful predators during the day on the road. But unfortunately, this also meant that he did not have the opportunity to harvest a large amount of food. At this time, his neck was wrapped in a special scarf, which was the corpse of the desert viper that he had killed before. The youth used his fingers to lovingly stroke the snake's scales. From his fingertips came a cold touch, but in his heart, this cold touch turned into a warm feeling. This was the only food left in Zhenjin's hands, and he had deliberately preserved it. On one hand, as long as it was there, Zhenjin had hope. On the other hand, Zhenjin was also vigilant of the risks. Rashly eating a large amount of food would also consume the body's water. As for the fact that the viper was a poisonous snake, that was secondary. The structure of the viper's body determined that its poison gland was in the snake's head. Once the snake's head was pinched off, there was basically no poison left. According to Zhenjin's physique, even if he was poisoned, he would not be afraid of the poison of this kind of ordinary beast. But it's best to make a fire and roast it. After all, this island is strange and dangerous. It can't be looked at with ordinary eyes. Maybe this kind of snake is poisonous all over? If that's the case, my current situation is tantamount to taking the initiative to put the Grim Reaper's scythe on my neck. When the sun completely disappeared from the horizon, the curtain of night fell. This day has passed. Zhenjin looked at the deep and vast sky. A sense of loss and panic appeared in his heart. His current situation was very dangerous and difficult. During the day, he hated the sunlight, but it actually gave him a good vision. And now, in the darkness, there would be more predators coming out. Zhenjin took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. Then, he happily found that he had really succeeded. With the first trial, he seemed to have made a qualitative leap in stabilizing his state of mind. He did not even need to pray. Now, he could only rely on himself to keep calm. Of course, he also knew the result of praying. As for the Shengming Emperor's response, he did not have much expectation. Late at night, the temperature was very low. From Zhang mouth and nose began to exhale clouds of white gas. The chill was bone-piercing. The hunger became more and more intense, tormenting the youth. His stomach was already protesting, letting out a growling sound. But compared to hunger, the feeling of thirst was more. Zhang felt that his throat was smoking. If there was a lake, he would want to immerse himself in it, swim and drink to his heart's content. There was too little water. Zhang originally placed his hopes on some desert plants, but this hope was shattered. He did not even see the shadow of a cactus. There was no moon tonight. The sky was full of stars. Zhang looked up at the starry sky, feeling the ruthlessness and indifference of the stars, as if watching him slowly walk towards a dead end. He tried to identify, wanting to rely on the stars to prove his direction, but he failed. In this aspect, he did not dabble in a complete layman. Because of the correct strategy during the day, he still had a lot of stamina left. The youth continued to trudge alone in the desert under the starry night. Unknowingly, a sand dune began to appear beside Zhang. What is that? In his blurred vision, Zhang saw the shadow of a beast entrenched at the waist of the sand dune. Chapter 49. The young man immediately stopped in his tracks and could not help but take a deep breath. After the initial shock, joy began to spread in his heart. In the middle of the night, his eyes seemed to be shining. Kill it, then take its blood and drink it. I'm really going to die of thirst. Zhang shouted in his heart. But immediately, the joy in his heart faded a little and was replaced by hesitation. From afar, this beast's body is huge. It seems to be lying on the sand, but even so, it's already more than 2 meters tall. It's so far away, yet I can't sense its aura. It seems to be restrained. With such a large body, it won't be easy to survive in the desert. This means that it's very strong. If it's a silver level, no, even if it's a dark iron level magical beast, then I'll be in danger. On this incomparably dangerous isolated island, gold-ranked magical beasts were not rare. Zhang hesitated for a few breaths, then made a decision. He still chose to attack, because without food and water, his condition would only worsen. The desert was barren and vast, unlike rainforests and forests. If Zhang gave up this opportunity, then how would he be able to find a suitable prey to hunt in the future? The chances of that were not high at all. So, while he still had his stamina, it was more sensible to attack at this time. If I run into danger, I can only hope for a sudden mutation of my ability. Zhang secretly gritted his teeth, bent his back, slowed his pace, and quietly approached the giant beast. In the darkness, the giant beast's body seemed to be curled up into a ball, motionless. When he was close enough, Zhang's expression suddenly changed, his nervousness and vigilance dissipated by half. So it's just a giant rock. Zhang exhales a mouthful of turbid air and slowly approaches the giant beast he originally thought. Although he had an outstanding physique, he was still human, and his vision was greatly affected at night. If it was a dark elf, it would have seen clearly and would not have caused such a misunderstanding. Zhang sized up the giant rock in front of him. The giant rock was oval-shaped, silently standing in the darkness. The surface of the boulder was vaguely glittering with a metallic luster, but it was full of bumps and hollows, completely insulated from the word smooth. There were countless tiny and dense holes. What was strange was that a warm aura was constantly being emitted from these small pits that were as small as sesame seeds. Zhang was stunned for a moment. Song Su's words came back to his mind. Could this be the golden hemp stone? Goldstone was a mixture of iron, gold, earth, and many other minerals. Depending on the place of origin, the composition and ratio of the components in the gold hempstone would be different. The exploration team had also encountered a large group of golden hemp stones, and Sangsu's preliminary inference was that these golden hemp stones contained abundant gold. Unfortunately, in order to extract the gold from the huge and heavy gold hemp stone, a special method was needed. The exploration team did not have the ability to do so. Of course, the most important thing for them was to save themselves. After that, they would find water and food for the camp later. Gold hemp stones usually come in groups, but there's only one here. Jun stroked the surface of the boulder with his hand, feeling both disappointed and relieved. He was disappointed that there was no harvest of food and water, but he also felt lucky that he could find a piece of golden hemp stone. This kind of boulder was exposed to the sun during the day, absorbing heat and storing it in the heart of the stone. Even the bone-chilling desert late at night, the golden hemp stone was still very warm. This solved a big problem for Jin. The clothes on his body looked very thin in the middle of the night. Just now, he was still annoyed that he did not have the materials to make a fire. Now, he did not need to make a fire. He could rely on this boulder to protect himself from the heat and resist the harsh cold. The night passed like this, but when Jin opened his eyes again, he found that the sun had already appeared on the horizon. It was dawn. Jin moved his hands and feet a little. He was happy to find that his physical strength had recovered a lot. He had rested well last night. His body was fully rested, and his spirit had calmed down because of the abundant time. What made him feel gratified was that he was not in a deep sleep. Instead, he remained vigilant and his nerves were stretched taut. He had woken up 2 or 3 times during the night because the howling cold wind in the desert was too strong, exceeding the alert level in his heart. After waking up, he quickly fell asleep again. This made him very satisfied. It seems that I have received such training or had such an experience to be able to sleep and be vigilant at the same time. Actually, it was not easy to achieve this. Jun had a new understanding of himself. This time, Jun woke up because he heard a strange sound again. The sound came from the northeast. The sound is very strange. It seems like there's a snake. The golden hemp stone that Jun was resting on was located at the waist of the sand dune. Jin had a thought. He slowed down his steps and carefully approached the top of the sand dune. At the top, he slowly stretched out his head and carefully observed. It was dawn, and there was not enough light. The first thing that entered his eyes were pieces of golden hemp stone. There were hundreds of these stones with different spacing and sizes. They were like chess pieces placed on a chessboard made of sand dune. This undoubtedly confirmed Sangsu's words. Golden hemp stone appeared in pieces. The golden hemp stone that Jin was resting on was only the outermost piece. Then, Jin's pupils shrank slightly. He saw 2 groups of beasts confronting each other in the middle of the golden hemp stone. One group of beasts was a green-skinned lizard, while the other group was a golden-skinned scorpion. The lizard was as big as a warhorse, while the scorpion was slightly smaller. The lizard hissed like a snake, while the scorpion hissed. Both sides were trying to intimidate the other. Jin was woken up by a mix of these 2 sounds. Jin's head tightened. He sensed the life force of these 2 beasts. The lizard and the scorpion were at least black iron level, while the leader of the group was at least silver level. Not counting the mutation, just 1 silver level magical beast is enough to pose a fatal threat to me. When the number of black iron magical beasts reaches a certain level, it can also cause me to lose my life. Jin had not fully explored the theory of mutation. He could not use his chi, his prayers were not answered, and he did not have any armor on him. The only thing that comforted him was the weapon in his hand. But this silver-level weapon was also being worn down over time. The legs of the blade spider were indeed the best material for making weapons. But this material had to be processed to stabilize the magic within and retain its sharpness. And Jin was just using it. He made it crudely and did not process it at all. As time passed, this spider-foot sword would become weaker and weaker. So, Jin did not act rashly. He squatted in place and quietly observed. He still did not know why these 2 groups of beasts were confronting each other. No matter which side it was, he did not want to provoke them. The young man secretly prayed as he peeked. If these two groups of beasts start fighting, it might create an opportunity for me to harvest some food. As if hearing Zhang Jin's prayer, the two groups of beasts finally lost their patience and began to fight. But it was not a large-scale battle. Instead, the leader of the group of beasts pounced into the center of the battlefield alone and began a one-on-one battle. Swoosh! The green lizard let out an extremely unpleasant cry, then opened its mouth and spat out a thick green acid. The acid hit the golden scorpion directly. The golden scorpion immediately used its huge pincers to block in front of itself like a shield, successfully protecting its eyes. Asterisk sizzle. Asterisk white smoke immediately rose from the surface of the golden scorpion's pincers. Zhenjin narrowed his eyes. He keenly noticed that some of the acid had splashed onto the golden stone. Within a few breaths, the golden stone was corroded into a fist-sized hole. If this was sprayed on my body, without the protection of qi, I'm afraid that after 2 or 3 breaths, I would only be left with bones. What made Jinjin feel relieved was that after spitting out this large amount of acid, the lizard leader immediately became dispirited and took the initiative to retreat. Obviously, this kind of acid was not its usual combat method. But as the lizard retreated, the golden scorpion advanced even faster. The two quickly approached each other. The green lizard immediately opened its mouth and let out another strange cry, as if it was going to spit out the green liquid again. But the golden scorpion was even more cunning. It had already raised its pincers and blocked in front of itself. At the same time, it raised its scorpion tail, which was at least 2 meters long, and fiercely stabbed. The scorpion tail was sharp, like the spearhead of a knight's spear. The green lizard's head was directly pierced by the scorpion tail, creating a round hole that reached the brain. This was a fatal wound. After succeeding in its attack, the golden scorpion immediately retreated. It retreated very quickly. From the round hole above the green lizard's head, white brain matter mixed with light green blood spurted out like a fountain. The green lizard leader let out an extremely tragic cry. At the last moment, it exploded with a violent attack. The corrosive green liquid in its mouth spewed out again, without any aim, like a green light pillar that swept randomly. The huge gold stone was swept, and immediately thick white smoke rose up, making sizzling sounds, and then melted under the sun like snow. The green lizards of the same race were also affected. The lizards fell into a panic, and the unlucky ones screamed. Some of their legs were corroded, revealing white bones. Some of their eyes were frantically digging into the sand, trying to save themselves. There were also a small number of golden scorpions that were attacked by the green liquid. Their shells quickly softened, and after a few breaths, only the ends of their scorpion tails were left. Silver-level golden scorpions could resist the green liquid, but most of the black iron scorpions could not. Fortunately, the green lizard's outburst only lasted for a few breaths. Soon, the green liquid in its mouth was no longer spewed out. After losing their leader, the green lizards retreated one after another. The golden scorpions won, but they did not pursue the victory as Jinjin had predicted. After the golden scorpions chased away the green lizards, they did not even care about their corpses and surrounded the gold stone in 2s and 3s. Under Jinjin's astonished gaze, these golden scorpions first used their scorpion tails to pierce through the gold stone, and then worked together to shatter the huge gold stone. Then, they used their huge pincers to clamp the gold stone scattered on the sand into smaller pieces. Finally, they put these pieces of gold stone into their mouths and chewed continuously. So these gold stones are the golden scorpion's food? Looking at the scene in front of him, Zhenjin was deep in thought. Zhenjin could not help but gulp. He looked at these golden scorpions eating in big mouthfuls, and his hunger and thirst were stimulated even more. He waited patiently. The golden scorpions ate for more than half an hour, and finally left noisily, leaving behind a pile of debris. After confirming that it was safe, Zhenjin rushed back to the original battlefield with excitement. The magical beasts that were shot by the acid and killed could not be eaten. But the leader of the lizards, after spraying out all the acid and losing all its blood and brain matter, still had intact flesh. Jinjin used the weapon in his hand to cut open the leader of the lizards and took the flesh from its body. Jinjin had only slept for a while, and after watching a battle, he suddenly had plenty of food. But I still lack water. Will I be lucky enough to encounter such luck again? The young man's excitement and joy gradually calmed down. There was still some residual acid, and Jinjin carefully used his weapon to stain a little. Jinjin waited patiently for a while, and found that the silver-ranked spider blade was still as hard and sharp as ever, and was slightly relieved. At this time, the sun was starting to appear on the horizon, and Jinjin's vision became better. The temperature was also starting to rise. Jinjin knew that this was a rare opportunity to travel, and was about to set off when his pupils suddenly shrank. This is... A touch of pink appeared in his field of vision, which shocked him greatly. Chapter 50. A group of people was fleeing in the desert. Quick, faster. Keep up, don't fall behind. They're coming. Someone screamed in panic. What followed was a blood-curdling scream. The people at the back of the team could not help but look back and saw that one of their companions had been pushed to the ground by the green lizard. The lizard opened its mouth wide and bit its companion's head. After the green lizard that was eating, another lizard ran out. The lizard exploded with astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, it was about to pounce on the two people at the back of the team. No, one of them shouted. His heart was filled with fear, but his face revealed a fierce expression. At the critical moment of life and death, he actually reached out and pulled down his companion beside him. His companion was pulled to the ground and could not get up for a moment. He opened his mouth and wanted to curse, but he was killed by the lizard and could only let out a shrill scream. The screams made the hearts of the survivors tighten. One of the girls saw the scene behind her and gritted her teeth. She took out a potion from the leather bag at her waist and sprinkled it into the sky behind her. The potion was like powder, but when it was sprinkled into the air, it immediately turned into a thick green smoke. Hold your breath, the girl reminded loudly. She was ZD. The surviving companions seemed to be no stranger to this green smoke. They immediately held their breaths and crawled out of the smoke. The green lizards that were chasing after them inhaled the smoke into their noses and lungs because they breathed normally. Soon, these green lizards let out screams. Some struggled in the thick green smoke, and some scurried around. The entire group of lizards that were chasing after them fell into a panic. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the surviving members of the exploration team successfully distanced themselves from these lizards. Quick, run. We're going to succeed. Lady ZD is really amazing. It's all thanks to your potion. Is there more? Hurry up and sprinkle more. Everyone shouted and shouted. The joy of escaping from a desperate situation filled everyone's hearts. How can you do this? I just saw it. You killed your companion. Baye's questioning was particularly ear-piercing in the cheers. The person who was criticized by him first looked ashamed, but soon became angry and scolded. Get lost. Mind your own business. You. Baye was tongue-tied and shocked. The person who was criticized looked agitated. His good temper was completely gone, as if he had become a different person. All right, we're not out of danger yet. Everything that happens here will be decided by the Lord Jinjin. An old man spoke in a timely manner, stabilizing the group. He was Tsang Su. At the same time, in the northeast direction of this surviving team, there was a sand dune. Two heads popped out from the sand dune. Their faces were similar. They were the brothers Lan Zhao and Huang Zhao. Big brother, I found them. Zhuang Zhao was very excited, but immediately restrained her excitement. They're being chased by green lizards. They really are here. Lan Zhao nodded. Why don't I see Lord Jinjin? I'm afraid they've been separated and haven't met up yet. We also discovered the pink markings on these green lizards and followed the tracks of the wild beasts to find this place. Huang Zhao guessed. It turned out that after the exploration team was teleported, they immediately encountered a storm. ZD relied on medicine to quickly melt an underground cave in the sandstorm, helping many of the exploration team members. The underground cave was not secure, and it had collapsed when the sandstorm raged. Unexpectedly, it was connected to another underground cave. In order to survive, everyone could only come to this underground cave. In the end, they found that this underground cave in the desert was not naturally formed. It was a group of green lizards that created the underground cave. The exploration team members were no strangers to these green lizards. They had encountered them after being teleported to the desert. The place where ZD and the others arrived was the most important place in the lizard's underground lair, the nursery. A large number of lizard eggs were stored in the nursery, and there were female lizards guarding them. After the two sides met, they immediately started fighting. There were only 2 female lizards. Under the effect of ZD's medicine, they were quickly killed by the exploration team members. However, such a movement attracted the attention of the other green lizards, who immediately launched a crazy revenge attack on the exploration team members. Fortunately, the entrance of the nursery was very narrow, so everyone defended it. The green lizards were endless, and the exploration team began to suffer casualties. Song-Su learned through autopsy that the green lizards did not go into estrus frequently, and each female lizard only gave birth to 1 egg each. However, there were so many lizard eggs in the cave, so it was natural to judge that the group of lizards outside was very large. There was no doubt that there was no way out if they stayed here. After realizing this, everyone began to plan to break out of the encirclement. During this time, ZD sprinkled pink medicine on the lizards, hoping that it would send a signal. As for now, they had already broken out of the encirclement and temporarily escaped the pursuit of the lizards. "Let's go and meet up with them quickly," Lan Zhao said and was about to leave. However, the next moment, his arm was grabbed by his younger brother, Huang Zhao. "No, brother, look." Following the direction of Huang Zhao's finger, Lan Zhao saw a large number of green lizards. They were blocking in front of ZD and Song-Su. However, ZD and Song-Su did not know that their vision was blocked by a sand dune. Bystanders saw the real battle clearly, and Lan Zhao and Huang Zhao discovered it. Not good. They're going to be surrounded by lizards. If this goes on, they'll definitely die. We have to warn them quickly. Lan Zhao's expression changed drastically. "Wait." Huang Zhao stopped him again. "What are you doing?" Lan Zhao glared at him. "Saving people is more important." Huang Zhao said, "Don't be silly, brother. These people are dead for sure. Look again." Lan Zhao took a closer look, and his face turned pale. He realized that not only was there a large group of lizards in front of the exploration team, but there were also groups of lizards on their left and right sides. Even so, Lan Zhao's body swayed, and he gritted his teeth, but was interrupted by Huang Zhao. "The Lord Jinjin is not here, and they're only relying on Miss ZD's medicine to struggle. There's no hope of survival. Don't be silly, brother. Even with the 2 of us, we're just going to die." Huang Zhao's expression was cold. Then he asked, "Who are they to you? Are they worth your life?" "But we're slaves now, and we've discussed before that we're going to follow the Lord Jinjin together, right?" Lan Zhao hesitated. Huang Zhao's face darkened. "Slaves? I don't want to be a slave. The previous situation was because I had no choice. Besides, we don't even know where the Lord Jinjin is now. Since he's not here, he won't know what happened here in the future. Aren't we following the Lord Jinjin for a good future? It's not our intention to die like this." "But," Lan Zhao's expression wavered, "I have to at least warn them." "Don't do that." Huang Zhao shook his head. "It's too late. They've already been surrounded. If you open your mouth and let them find us, they'll definitely ask us to support them. When the time comes, should we go or not? If we go, we'll die. If we don't go, they'll definitely hold a grudge against us. Maybe they'll use some method to record this matter. In the future, the Lord Jinjin will find their relics, and it's very likely that he'll know the secret of us not saving them. This is too bad for us." Lan Zhao didn't reply. He just looked at the exploration team members in the distance. These people's faces were still full of joy, and they didn't know that they were in a desperate situation. Lon Zeos' frown deepened. His hands subconsciously grabbed 2 handfuls of sand, and his fists clenched tightly. Seeing Lon Zeo like this, Huang Zeo's heart skipped a beat. He knew his brother very well. Therefore, Huang Zeo shouted in a low voice, "Do you want me to die?" "Brother." "What?" Lon Zeo was stunned. "I know that these people have helped you before. Even the Lord Jinjin and Miss ZD saved my life. You don't want to owe them anything. You want to repay their kindness. You must be thinking if you should let me go and support them alone." Huang Zeo's words stabbed Lon Zeo's heart. Lon Zeo was indeed thinking so. But then Huang Zeo said, "If you go, you'll definitely die. How am I supposed to survive in this desert all by myself? Besides, how could I just watch you throw your life away without doing anything? You're my biological brother. If you go, I'll definitely follow behind you. If you die, my life will be lost too." "Brother." Lon Zeo gritted his teeth and stared at Huang Zeo. "Brother." Huang Zeo also stared back, not showing any weakness. "Have you forgotten Mother's last words? You swore that you'd take care of me for the rest of your life. You swore that even if you die before me. Now, if you go support them, you'll be sending me to my death." "Yes, I swore. I've been taking care of you since you were young, haven't I? But you're already grown up. You're a seasoned seaman, and you're even at the Black Iron rank. But so what? In the Spider Forest, I was still abandoned by you." Huang Zeo mercilessly interrupted Lon Zeo. "I thought you were dead at that time." Lon Zeo roared. His face was red from anger. Huang Zeo sneered. "If I die, it might be a good thing for you, isn't it? After all, it was you who killed Father. If I die, who will know your secret? You'll be free." "No, how can you think like that?" Lon Zeo let out a painful howl. His face was distorted, and the veins on his forehead were bulging. Huang Zeo's voice suddenly rose. "Then let's go. We'll leave this place together. We'll escape from this damned island together. You have to prove yourself with your actions." Huang Zeo's words were like a spear made of ice, directly stabbing into the deepest part of Lon Zeo's heart. This strong man half knelt on the ground, staring at his brother. He didn't move for a long time, like a statue. The 2 brothers stared at each other like this for a few breaths. Then, they were disturbed by the movements of the green lizards. Huang Zeo saw a few green lizards rushing towards the sand dune they were on. He hurriedly urged, "Let's go. If we don't go now, we won't be able to escape." He immediately got up and pulled Lon Zeo with all his strength. At first, he didn't pull, but Huang Zeo tried 2 more times. Finally, he pulled Lon Zeo up and ran down the sand dune, escaping from this place. At the last moment of their retreat, Lon Zeo looked back. He saw that the exploration team had already discovered their situation. They stopped in their tracks, obviously in a panic. He let out a deep sigh in his heart, lowered his head, and escaped with Huang Zeo side by side. Chapter 51. We're finished. There are these green-skinned beasts everywhere. What should we do? We can't leave. Song Su panted heavily. At this moment, the old man's face was no longer calm. Seeing that there were more and more green lizards around them, the exploration team members fell into despair. Many of them roared, "This is impossible. Lord Song Su, didn't you say that these green lizards would go out to look for food in the morning? It's precisely because of this that we chose to break out of the encirclement. The group of lizards in front of us is the main force that is looking for food, but they came back too early. It's useless to say this now. We can retreat to the underground cave from before. We can't retreat. Instead of this, we might as well take the risk and charge forward." "Are you crazy? These green lizards in front are the strongest among the beasts. Otherwise, why would they go out to hunt?" Song Su was silent. ZD gritted her teeth. "Let's climb this dune first." With that, she took the lead and moved. Although they were in a desperate situation, their survival instinct drove everyone to follow ZD. The exploration team climbed the dune, and the green lizards followed closely behind. Every time these green lizards approached, ZD would throw out a bag of powder and scatter it, forming a thick green smoke to block the lizards. Although the green smoke would continue to spread and quickly dilute, no longer obstructing the lizards, the exploration team still successfully climbed to the top of the dune. Then, everyone became even more desperate. They looked down from above and could see very clearly. The dune was surrounded by densely packed green lizards. There were 2,000 to 3,000 of them. Most of them were ordinary wild beasts. The lizards that stayed around the nest were basically old, weak, sick, and disabled. The most elite were the ones that had gone out to hunt and returned early. Almost all of them had the life aura of black iron level. What are you still struggling for? You might as well wait for death here. Some people even collapsed on the sofa. Rather than being eaten by these green lizards, I might as well die in the sandstorm. Someone smiled bitterly. The lizards gathered under the dune, becoming denser and denser. Soon, another lizard rushed up the sand dune. ZD took out some medicinal powder and sprinkled it on the ground. Immediately, a thick green fog was created. Clouds of mist formed a temporary wall, repelling the lizards that came to invade. Seeing this scene, Baya praised sincerely. If it weren't for Lady ZD, we would have died long ago. Someone saw that ZD's pouch was filled with bags of medicine. His eyes lit up and he suggested, "With so many medicines, we can wait for a strong wind and scatter these bags of medicine in the wind to completely kill these lizards. Even if we can't kill them, we can still carve out a path." ZD shook her head. With the wind, the smoke won't be able to gather together and will quickly disperse. Moreover, the lizards were not stupid. They would turn around and run when they encountered the green smoke. Most importantly, we are more fragile than these lizards. The green smoke is even more harmful to us. Everyone was dumbfounded. Then what do? ZD sighed and looked at the green lizards around the dune. We can only hope that these lizards won't be able to attack for a long time and will disperse on their own. What the girl was looking forward to did not happen. The lizards maintained their encirclement and kept trying to attack the dune, although they were repelled by the green fog every time. ZD would replenish the green fog in a timely manner whenever the green fog was thinner. This special powder was being consumed rapidly. Although ZD had made a lot of it, at this speed, it would be completely used up in a day or two. Seeing the green lizards hissing and screaming, but unable to kill their way up the dune, many of the exploration team members relaxed. Sang-soo and ZD, however, were worried. They knew very well that the situation in front of them was actually very dangerous. These lizards were only scared away by the green fog. The green fog covered a limited area. If they charged desperately, they could still charge up. In fact, as long as these lizards held their breaths, they could also charge through the green fog. However, they were wild beasts after all. They did not have the intelligence of humans and did not know how to be flexible. Time passed, and the sun climbed higher and higher. It was noon. Sang-soo saw that the lizards were all lying under the dune lazily. Among them, the powerful lizards occupied the shade of the dune. The old scholar frowned deeply and said his guess, "I reckon that these lizards won't give up on killing us. I've already observed that there are no silver-level lizards among these lizards. This is basically impossible. To maintain such a large group of beasts, there needs to be at least a silver-level lizard leader. Look at those lizards again. They are the strongest among the lizards, and they all have the aura of black iron. However, almost all of these magical beasts are injured, and many of their injuries are quite serious. I'm guessing that this batch of hunting lizards encountered a strong enemy in the morning. Not only did they not find any food, but they were also hunted down. They suffered heavy losses, and even their leader lost his life." ZD suddenly understood. "So, we are the only food in the eyes of these lizards?" Sang-soo nodded and then shook his head slightly. "That's not all. We also destroyed those lizard eggs. The smell of those eggs has been lingering on our bodies. These lizards hate us to the core. I'm afraid that even if we escape to the end of the desert, they will chase us there and tear us, the murderers of their descendants, to pieces." Everyone was silent. Baya couldn't help but complain on behalf of ZD. "But if we didn't destroy those lizard eggs, Without the egg liquid as the ingredient, Lady ZD wouldn't have been able to make these powders. Without these, we would have died long ago. How could we still be alive? Song Su shook his head. I definitely don't mean to criticize Lady ZD. In fact, I'm very grateful to her. I'm just telling everyone what I know. Everyone fell silent again. There wasn't even a trace of wind. The sunlight was like thousands of arrows shooting down. The temperature in the air became very high, and the people exposed at the top of the dune found it more and more difficult to endure. They were like fish caught on a red-hot iron plate. They were really going to be roasted. Many people took off their outer clothes and used them as small tents, propping them up above their heads. They didn't dare to sit down because the sand under their feet was extremely hot. At this moment, if a lizard egg was broken and fell on it, it would immediately be steamed and beaten. If only we had enough bows and arrows. Standing on the dune and looking down from above, we could totally shoot these lizards. Let these lizards become our food, someone muttered. But unfortunately, almost all the short bows and arrows made by the exploration team were lost in the sandstorm. Only half of the exploration team members were left. Not everyone had a weapon, and even fewer people carried a short bow with them. This was the desert, and there was no wood for them to make. It was Lord Jin's idea to make short bows. I wonder where the knight is. If he's here, he might be able to think of a way, someone said. Jin had led everyone to victory and led the exploration team out of the survival crisis. His prestige had already reached the hearts of everyone. So at this moment, everyone looked forward to a wise and powerful leader like him. Baya looked into the distance. I don't think Lord Jin will die so easily. He is only temporarily separated from us. He will definitely appear and come here to save us. Baya's tone was full of certainty, which made everyone feel quite strange. So, someone asked, why do you say that? Can you contact Lord Jin? Baya shook his head and widened his eyes. With a trace of doubt on his face, he said matter-of-factly, because Jin is a knight and a Templar knight. He will definitely come back and take us out. Because this is a knight. Everyone smiled bitterly. Song Su shook his head slightly. After interacting with Baya for a long time, everyone could tell. This young man seemed to have an inexplicable trust and respect for knights. This level of trust and respect was far beyond ordinary, so much so that it seemed a little naive and stupid. But at this time, no one wanted to use common sense to refute this naivety and stupidity. This was because they, who were in a desperate situation, were also looking forward to such a knight who would stand up for them when they were at their most helpless and dangerous, using his superb ability and wisdom to help them, the weak, out of danger. After this short conversation, there was a long silence. The extremely dazzling sunlight was extremely domineering, making it almost impossible for people to lift their eyelids. They could only lower their heads to look at the sand under their feet. Everyone was hungry and thirsty, and many people's lips were dry and cracked. Although there was food and water, there was not much. Under Song Su's suggestion, they had already begun to limit the supply. One of the exploration team members suddenly looked surprised and then quickly rubbed his eyes. After confirming again, he shouted, "Come and look. Is there a person over there?" This voice immediately attracted everyone's attention. There is a person. Who is it? I can't see clearly yet. He's running towards us. Song Su narrowed his eyes. The foot of the dune is attracted by the green skin, and this person is still rushing over. It's obvious that he's bold. It's the Lord Jin. It must be him, Baya shouted excitedly. As the distance got closer and closer, everyone could finally recognize the person's face. Immediately, cheers rang out. It's the Lord. It's indeed the Lord Jin. I was right, wasn't I? Baya laughed loudly. Lord Jin, we're here. Have you finally come to save us? Many people could not help but cry tears of joy at this moment. ZD's breathing also quickened. Her crystal-like eyes were filled with surprise and anticipation. But soon, the girl frowned slightly, and her heart tightened. Ah, he's injured. The expressions of the excited crowd also changed. They also noticed that Jin, who was rushing over, had his left arm hanging. It seemed to be broken. At the same time, his body was wrapped in bandages. These bandages were obviously long strips of cloth that Jinjin had torn from his clothes. The Lord is actually injured. That sandstorm was indeed too terrifying. I wonder if the Lord's injury is serious? The exploration team members were all on tenterhooks. After all, Jin's condition was directly related to everyone's death at this moment. Of course, the lizards also noticed Jin rushing over. Soon, several lizards from the outermost circle charged at Jinjin. Jinjin held the spider blade in his right hand and did not dodge. He rushed into the middle of these lizards and slashed left and right. After the blade light slashed past, green blood would splatter out. These ordinary lizards were all beheaded and died on the sand. Jin's slaughter immediately caused a riot among the lizards. More lizards charged at him. This time, it was not just ordinary lizards, but also bronze-level magical beasts. Jin's momentum was immediately reduced by a lot. Bronze-level lizards were not only bigger and stronger, but more importantly, they spat acid more rapidly. Ordinary lizards, once they wanted to spit acid, would stay in place, their necks would thicken, and after about 2 breaths, they would open their mouths to spit green liquid. This time was completely enough for Jinjin to complete the counterattack. In Jin's opinion, if ordinary lizards wanted to spit acid, it was a good time to attack. The bronze lizard only needed a breath to prepare to spit acid. If it was a one-on-one battle, this time was enough for Jinjin to dodge and counterattack. But the current situation was that Jinjin was alone, and there were more than a dozen lizards besieging him. It was impossible for him to choose the most perfect dodge path, where he could dodge and approach, and then counterattack. I must not touch this acid. Jinjin was as calm as ice. The acid of a bronze-level lizard could also quickly corrode the gold stone. Jinjin did not have any fighting aura to protect his body at the moment, nor did he have any armor on his body. If he was hit by the acid, he would be seriously injured immediately. Lord Jinjin, it seems that the injuries on the Lord's body have a great impact on him. The Lord is constantly dodging. Could it be that he can't use his fighting aura to protect his body? At the top of the dune, everyone looked into the distance. The battle situation in front of them gradually made their hearts tighten. Suddenly, someone cried out in alarm and subconsciously shouted, "Be careful!" It turned out that among the besieging lizards, one of them was very sinister and actually spat acid. The acid attacked Jin's back. But in the next moment, Jinjin seemed to have heard the cry of the exploration team members. Without looking back, he rolled on the ground and perfectly dodged the acid. The other lizards also hurriedly dodged. The acid missed, and the liquid fell on the sand, immediately making a sizzling sound. A shallow groove was corroded in the sand, and pungent white smoke rose. It seems that I've undergone a lot of similar training in the past, so I have enough combat experience. Now, I'm facing this kind of siege alone, and I'm calm and at ease. At this moment, Jin's understanding of himself deepened. Even though he could only see in front of him, when he was surrounded and intercepted, he could always see several dodging paths. His vision was not limited to the front, but as he moved and dodged, his gaze constantly swept quickly, and his ears were also listening to the sound of the wind. Therefore, even if the acid shot from behind him, he could still dodge in time. Of course, this was also because the speed of the acid's flying was not as fast as a normal arrow. The exploration team members did not know Jin's confidence. Seeing the young knight being surrounded and in danger, they were all frightened. They felt that Jinjin was walking on a tightrope on the edge of a cliff. As long as he's hit by this acid, Lord Jinjin will be in danger. He's injured, but he still risked his life to rush over to save us. This is a holy night. Lord Jinjin, just as he said, he has never given up on us. Other than being worried, the exploration team members were even more touched. We want to support the Lord, but we only have short bows, and the distance is too far. We can't shoot the lizards beside the Lord at all, and we can't provide him with any help. The exploration team members gritted their teeth. The range of long-range weapons was divided into maximum range and effective range. The effective range was mid-range, and long-range weapons had lethality, and the maximum range was only the farthest place they could shoot. The short bows were crudely made, and whether it was the effective range or the maximum range, they could not reach Zhang Jin's position. The exploration team members were trapped at the top of the dune. For a moment, they could only watch helplessly. Oh no! Everyone's expressions darkened again. They saw a third group of lizards rushing toward Zhang Jin. Among this group of green lizards, there were 3 black iron-level lizards. Chapter 52. The lizard opened its mouth and spat out a stream of green acid. "Be careful," Lan Zhao shouted. But it was too late. The lizard's timing was perfect. Huang Zhao's expression was fierce, but he couldn't dodge. He could only close his eyes and clench his teeth. Poochie. Huang Zhao's vision was covered in darkness, but he was pushed to the ground. In the next moment, he opened his eyes and saw his brother Lan Zhao's face twisted in pain. "Brother," Huang Zhao shouted, and hurriedly rolled on the ground. With space, he threw the javelin in his hand with all his strength. "Die!" Huang Zhao shouted. After the green-skinned lizard spat out the green liquid, it immediately became sluggish. Before it could close its mouth, the javelin pierced through its skull and got stuck between its bones. At the critical moment of life and death, Huang Zhao took advantage of the lizard's weakness and killed it. "Brother," Huang Zhao saw the lizard fall to the ground. He took a deep breath and threw himself to Lan Zhao's side. Lan Zhao was lying on the ground, in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Even a tough guy like him was howling in grief. His voice was very mournful. Seeing the wound on Lan Zhao's back, Huang Zhao couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The wound was very terrifying. The green acid corroded the flesh, making sizzling sounds. The flesh turned into pus, and a pungent stench wafted through the air. The injury worsened very quickly. Huang Zhao was sure that in a few breaths' time, he would see Lan Zhao's bones. This was only a bronze-ranked lizard. Huang Zhao didn't dare touch it with his hands. He hurriedly took out the water bag at his waist and poured it all down. The acid was diluted by a large amount of water, and Lan Zhao's injury quickly healed. Huang Zhao grabbed Lan Zhao's arm and lifted his body up. His other hand poured the water bag, quickly washing the acid on Lan Zhao's body onto the sand. Save water. Lan Zhao's pain was greatly alleviated. He used what little rationality he had left to remind Huang Zhao. "I can't keep him." Huang Zhao clenched his teeth. Lan Zhao's injury was serious. He had no choice but to use all the water in the bag. Meanwhile, a streak of green liquid almost brushed past Zhang Jin's ear as it streaked across the sky. Zhang Jin's expression was grave. He was besieged by more than a dozen lizards, many of which were black iron and bronze-ranked magical beasts. Relying on his nimble movements and rich experience, Zhang Jin kept dodging while killing the multi-headed lizards. However, he could clearly feel that it was getting more and more difficult for him to move forward. He couldn't help but look back at the path he came from and yelled in his heart, "Why aren't they here yet?" Whoosh! A soft sound rang out. An arrow flew over the heads of countless lizards with great difficulty and stuck in the sand. "I've already done my best." At the top of the sand dune, Bai was panting heavily. He looked at the short bow in his hand and couldn't help but shake his head. Relying on his archery skills, he displayed the maximum range of his short bow, but the arrow he shot was still more than 10 steps away from Zhang Jin. This short bow, which had been ravaged by the wind and sand, was also on the verge of collapse after going through a series of battles. "Lord Zhang Jin, medicine! Use your nose to inhale," the others shouted in unison. Zhang Jin hesitated for a moment. He had his own plan, and Bai Ye's arrow was beyond his expectations. What should he do? Zhang Jin gritted his teeth and jumped up. At this critical moment, he chose to believe in his companions. The lizard in front of him didn't expect this, and its head was stomped on by Zhang Jin. The latter soared into the air and flew a distance away. This action was very dangerous. If Jinjin was hit by the acid spray in the air, it would be very difficult for him to dodge. With a bang, Jinjin landed on the ground. Some of the three lizards opened their mouths, while others waved their claws, wanting to kill Jinjin. In the blink of an eye, Jinjin noticed the only escape route with just a quick glance. He rolled again and again, barely managing to roll between two lizards. He reached out and grabbed the arrow shaft. His right foot pushed off the ground, and his whole body rose. He stood up again. He didn't stay in the same place. He opened his legs and ran with all his might. As he ran, he pulled out the arrowhead and saw a light yellow smoke coming out of the arrowhead. Jinjin took a deep breath with his nose and inhaled the smoke. Cough, cough, cough. He suddenly coughed and spat out clouds of gray smoke. At the same time, gray smoke came out of his ears and nose. He even shed light gray tears. After a few breaths, Jinjin found that he had lost his sense of smell and taste. He couldn't feel his tongue or nose. Even his vision and hearing had been weakened to a certain extent. This was very disadvantageous for him. If he wanted to break through the lizard's encirclement, he needed to be alert and alert. He relied on his sensitive 5 senses. Now, his 5 senses had been weakened by half. All of a sudden, the pressure that the lizards gave him increased by more than 2 times. At the top of the sand dune, use these arrowheads. ZD took out 5 or 6 arrowheads from the small leather bag at her waist. Baya immediately took them and placed them on the shaft of the arrow. These arrowheads were made by ZD in the lizard's hatching cave. Many people had seen them, so it wasn't strange. Whoosh! Baya prepared for a few breaths, then immediately pulled the bowstring and shot an arrow. The arrow streaked through the air, and green smoke kept coming out of the arrowhead. Then, it pierced into the sand, and a large amount of green smoke gushed out. The green smoke slowly sank and finally landed on the sand, forming a temporary smoke wall. The exploration team members shouted in unison to remind Jinjin. The needle gold immediately rushed into the green smoke and ran along the green smoke. The surrounding green lizards tried to rush into the green smoke, but they quickly retreated in a sorry state while howling. The green smoke was the same as the powder that ZD had sprinkled earlier. The green lizard's respiratory tracts would be strongly corroded when they breathed in the green smoke. However, after Jinjin inhaled the previous medicinal smoke, he was able to breathe freely in the green smoke without any reaction. There's actually such a wonderful medicine. The members of the exploration team widened their eyes in surprise. ZD shook her head. To be precise, this is a failed product. This medicine is poisonous, and only Lord Jin's body can control it. After using it, you can breathe freely in the corrosive green smoke for a certain period of time. If it were us, we would have suffocated to death long ago. Jin's cultivation was at least at the silver level, possibly at the gold level. Although his physical fitness was not as good as most magical beasts, it was far superior to normal humans. Just like that, Baya shot arrows again and again, and the medicinal powder created green smoke. With such help, Jinjin went all the way to the top of the dune without any hindrance and successfully joined the others. Sir, Lord Jinjin. The members of the exploration team surrounded Jinjin, all of them excited. Baya looked at Jinjin, his face full of admiration. Sir, what should we do next? Someone asked. Get ready. Everyone follow me and charge out. I'll charge at the front, Jinjin replied. Sangsu shook his head and smiled bitterly. Lord Jinjin, I'm afraid this plan won't work. ZD told him the details of the medicine. Jinjin smiled, but did not respond first. Instead, he turned around and looked in the direction he came from. His eyes narrowed slightly. After looking into the distance for a moment, he suddenly smiled. This time, the scene he observed did not disappoint him. He finally got what he wanted. Thus, he said, Of course, I can't do it alone. However, I've been here before. At that time, I hadn't discovered you. But the pink medicine showed that there were clues about you in the depths of the lizard's nest. It was difficult for me to rush into the lizard's underground nest alone, so I turned around and provoked them, attracting the scorpions. The injuries on my body were left by provoking the scorpions. Look, they're here. Everyone hurriedly looked over and saw a large number of scorpions rushing over from afar. These scorpions were huge in size, not to be outdone by the lizards. The Scorpion King that led the scorpions had a strong silver-level aura. My lord is wise. That's great. We're saved. Everyone was overjoyed. They finally saw the hope of escaping. However, the scene of the two groups of beasts killing each other did not happen. The scorpions stopped at the edge of the lizards' territory. After a commotion, almost all the dark iron-level lizards rushed to the front of the scorpions. The two groups of beasts did not fight directly. Instead, they confronted each other. Could it be that the scorpions saw through our plan? Damn it, let's fight. Everyone became impatient. Jinjin smiled. Don't worry. I witnessed the battle between the lizards and scorpions early this morning. They will provoke and clamor first. If both sides do not back down, the strongest will stand up and fight alone. The situation now is the same. Give me some water and food. I need to replenish myself, Jinjin requested. Immediately, water and dry food were passed to Jinjin. Jinjin had used up all the food he had. After he first investigated the lizard's nest, he ate the snake meat and ran back. He found the scorpions and lured them over. Jinjin chewed in big mouthfuls. As his Adam's apple bobbed, the food and water entered his stomach. The medicinal mist he inhaled was still in effect, so the youth could not taste it at all. However, just the act of eating alone gave him a sense of satisfaction and happiness. Jinjin was really hungry and thirsty now. After discovering the pink potion, he traveled a long distance to the edge of the lizard's nest. Then, he retreated and found the scorpions. He provoked the scorpions without hesitation and ran back and forth between the two places. After that, under the strong sunlight, he charged into the lizard group alone. Whether it was physical or mental strength, it was a huge test and consumed a lot of energy. Eat a little more, my lord. The exploration team members surrounded Jinjin and watched him eat in big mouthfuls. Many of them subconsciously swallowed their saliva. Although they had eaten, it was obvious that they would not be full. Yes, Lord Jinjin, you are powerful and need more food than us. My lord, put on this leather armor. We still have spare ones. Someone saw that Jinjin was dressed in linen clothes and immediately contributed the equipment on his body. The exploration team members all knew that he was the key to saving them. They placed all their hopes on Jinjin. How much food do we have left? After asking for the answer, Jinjin shook his head and stopped eating. There was not much food left in the team. The future situation was unpredictable, so he had to save as much as possible. Phew! He stood up, straightened his back, and exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Although he was only half full, he was satisfied at the moment. He took the leather armor and put it on. It was a little big, and it had the effect of resisting acid. Jinjin was not looking forward to it, but it was better than nothing. It was better than nothing. As for the sword, he had the spider blade, so he chose a dagger. After he was simply armed, he glanced around and looked at the 5 or 6 exploration team members. This was the most surprising thing for him. There were actually so many people who were still alive. This was greatly beyond his expectations. Jinjin was not a thief and did not have the ability to sneak. Therefore, he had only discovered clues to the powder potion and did not immediately go deep into the lizard's underground cave to investigate. At that time, Song Su, ZD, and the others were still in the underground cave. Neither side noticed each other. The second time, Jinjin came here and suddenly found that so many people were still alive. He was so happy. After seeing these people, he did not hesitate and instantly made up his mind to do his best to protect and save these people. On one hand, this was the creed of the Knights Templar. On the other hand, the pressure of surviving alone was very great. Jinjin had already deeply felt it. He needed Song Su's knowledge, ZD's potions, and so on. Even Baya and the others were precious labor. Looking further ahead, when he escaped from this island in the future, he would still have to compete for the position of the Lord of White Sand City. He would need the help of his subordinates. Chapter 53. The two groups of beasts were clamoring, their voices growing louder and louder. The scorpions gradually gained the upper hand, as they had a silver-ranked leader, so they were confident. On the other hand, the lizards did not have a silver-ranked leader, but under the pressure of the enemy, these lizards were united. Many of the black iron-ranked, green-skinned lizards huddled together, facing the silver-ranked scorpions without any intention of retreating. This was their nest, and there was more than one cave for storing lizard eggs. Moreover, the number of lizards was far greater than the number of scorpions. The leader of the scorpions finally lost its patience, waving its two large pincers and attacking. It charged into the group of lizards in front of it. A few of the strongest black iron-ranked lizards moved at the same time, some spitting acid, some baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, facing the silver-headed scorpion. The silver-headed scorpion was extremely savage and ferocious, quickly defeating these black iron-ranked lizards. The lizards were in a mess, and their tight formation became loose. The scorpion's morale was greatly boosted, and they followed their leader, charging in. At this moment, both sides were engaged in an all-out battle. Seeing this, Zhun Jin's heart finally settled. Compared to beasts, humans had poor physical qualities, but humans had intelligence, and this was something that most beasts could not achieve. Because of this, the scorpions were easily used by Zhun Jin. Of course, there are also intelligent beasts, not to mention pure dragon breeds. Just ZD's team that rescued Zhun Jin was almost completely wiped out by the attack of a cunning blue wolf. In a head-on confrontation, the blue wolf was probably weaker than the leader of the scorpions, but had the intelligence of a human, so it could fully display its abilities, cunning, insidious, and varied tactics. Zhun Jin was not in a hurry to lead the group to break out of the encirclement, but waited patiently for a while. After a while, the huge group of lizards became even more chaotic, and many of the lizards under the sand dune left, rushing to the front line. Although there was still a group of lizards surrounding the sand dune, not wanting to let go of the food on the sand dune, the number of lizards was much thinner than before. "Follow me closely." Zhun Jin took a deep breath, looking down at the lizards under the sand dune. Everyone could not hide their nervousness. The risk of breaking out of the encirclement was extremely high. If they were not careful, they would be eaten by the lizards or corroded to death by the acid. However, if they did not break out of the encirclement, they would definitely die if they stayed at the top of the sand dune. The breakout began. Zhun Jin took the lead, wielding the spider blade and wearing an ill-fitting leather armor. The lizards that surrounded the dune were originally lying on the sand with their heads lowered. When they heard the commotion, they immediately raised their heads and roared as they pounced on Zhun Jin and the others. When the first lizard was 10 steps away from Zhun Jin, it suddenly opened its mouth and sprayed out a stream of acid. When the acid hit, everyone immediately felt a strong, corrosive smell. Originally, everyone had been following closely behind Zhun Jin, but in the face of the acid, no one was able to withstand it and could only scatter. The tight formation had just broken out of the encirclement when it was completely broken. Zhun Jin threw himself onto the sand and rolled to the bottom of the lizard's head. He let out a low roar and suddenly jumped up. The spider blade in his hand swung backwards, drawing a shadow in the lizard's eyes. Zhun Jin and the lizard brushed past each other. The next moment, the lizard's head fell onto the sand, green blood spurting out from its neck like a fountain. Zhun Jin did not stop. His footsteps did not stop as he charged into the group of lizards. The spider blade was indeed made from a silver-ranked magical beast. It was incomparably sharp, and no lizard could withstand it. These lizards were only ordinary beasts. The bronze and dark iron magical beasts in the group were attracted by the scorpions. Thus, Zhun Jin was invincible, and no one could stop him. The valiant Zhun Jin attracted almost all the attention. Everyone followed Zhun Jin to break out of the encirclement, and the pressure was much lower than expected. Lord Jinjin is really too valiant. So this is the Temple Knights. The Temple Knights are indeed worthy of being the #1 knight order of the human race. Everyone looked at Zhang Jin's back, their hearts full of praise and admiration. However, just as everyone was about to kill their way through the encirclement of the lizards, a group of lizard magical beasts was finally attracted. At a glance, there were more than a dozen bronze-level lizards and 3 or 4 dark iron-level lizards. The lizards obviously did not want to let go of these delicious food. The pressure on Zhang Jin increased dramatically. His spider blade was still extremely sharp. Against the magical beast-level green lizards, one slash could cause heavy injuries. However, Zhang Jin also found it difficult to resist the acid sprayed by the lizards. The situation of both sides was actually very similar. Both sides had strong offense and weak defense. In order to avoid the acid, Zhang Jin could only choose to roll and jump, dodging with all his might. What was even more burdensome was that he could not move alone and had to take care of the people behind him. Ah! Someone screamed. Zhang Jin turned around and saw that one of the exploration team members had been shot by the acid and had fallen to the ground, rolling around in pain. Almost at the same time, the surrounding lizards seized the opportunity. Some of the lizards bit the head of the exploration team member, some bit his arms, and some bit his legs. The exploration team member struggled violently and roared desperately, but the lizards still easily broke away from Zhang Jin's team and retreated to the side. A few lizards surrounded the exploration team member, lowering their heads and opening their mouths, tearing, chewing, and swallowing to their heart's content. It was obvious that there was no way to save him. Zhang Jin could only grit his teeth and use 120% of his strength to open up a path in front. Finally, the young knight's vision suddenly opened up, and the pressure around him suddenly lightened. He had killed his way through the encirclement. "Ah, Lord Scholar!" Baiya's exclamation suddenly came from behind him. Zhang Jin hurriedly turned around, and with just a glance, his eyes were about to split open. Song Su fell to the sand, and the lizards behind him were only 5 or 6 steps away from him. This old scholar's physical fitness was poor to begin with. Although he had been taken care of during the process of breaking out, he still fell to the back of the team. "Let's go." To Zhang Jin's surprise, Baiya suddenly turned around, ran a few steps back, and handed his hand to Song Su. The hissing of the lizards behind him was almost close to his ears. Song Su knew his situation and shouted angrily at Baiya, "Go, don't worry about me." Baiya did not listen to his advice. He gritted his teeth and walked at Song Su's side. He grabbed Song Su's clothes and dragged him a few steps away. Almost at the same time, the lizard behind him pounced. Its wide mouth almost bit Song Su, but it gnawed on a mouthful of sand and stones. The lizard was furious. It turned around abruptly and swung its tail at him. Baiya did not have time to dodge at all. He could only hurriedly raise his free left arm. With a muffled bang, he was unsurprisingly sent flying into the air by the lizard's tail. The lizard opened its mouth and pounced on Song Su again. However, at this time, Zhang Jin finally turned around and attacked. With a slash, not only did he end the lizard's life, but he also forced the other lizards behind it to retreat. "Let's go." Zhang Jin picked up Song Su and broke out of the encirclement again. Song Su was thin and weak, and Zhang Jin's physical fitness was far superior to that of ordinary people. It was easy for him to carry him, and he was still running as if he was flying. Without Zhang Jin at the front, the team immediately lost their momentum. It was as if they had fallen into a swamp and were surrounded by more and more lizards. During this process, one of the members was too weak to dodge in time. He was sprayed in the head by the acid and died tragically on the spot. Zhang Jin gathered with Song Su and charged forward with his arms raised. They easily broke through the encirclement of the lizards in front of them, and the whole team started moving again. After killing for a while, there were not many lizards left in front of Zhang Jin, and they dispersed. "We're out." Everyone was ecstatic. Zhang Jin turned around and looked back. Almost everyone surrounded him except for Baiya, who was surrounded by lizards. It turned out that after Baya was swept away by the lizard's tail, his arm and ribs were fractured. He was in severe pain, and his speed was greatly reduced. The lizards did not dare to attack Jinjin, so they targeted the weakest one. Jinjin was about to turn around and save him again, but Song Su shouted in a low voice, "Sir, don't care about him. If we don't leave, these lizards will surround us again." Everyone looked at Song Su. Just now, Song Su was in a desperate situation. If it weren't for Baya buying time, Jinjin wouldn't have been able to save him in time. It could be said that Baya was also Song Su's savior. But now, Song Su stopped Jinjin and abandoned Baya. Such heartlessness and indifference caused everyone to look at Song Su in a different light. Although they despised him, no one refuted him. At this point, 2 of the exploration team members had already sacrificed themselves. Everyone was in a terrible state. Think about it. After experiencing the sandstorm and falling into the lizard's underground cave, they had finally managed to kill their way out, but they were surrounded at the top of the dune. Now that they had broken out, everyone was extremely hungry, thirsty, and exhausted. They were very weak. Most of them had already reached the limit of their physical strength. They were relying on their fear of death and their desire for life to support themselves. Song Su was right. Once Jinjin returned, they would be surrounded by the lizard again. How long could they hold on? Could they hold on until Jinjin returned with Baya? No one had the confidence. In an instant, Jinjin was also a little hesitant. Unlike Song Su, Baya was just an ordinary person. He was just a hunter, and his shooting skills were more accurate. His value was much lower than Song Su's, but he was not irreplaceable. If I go to save him, and these people are attacked by the lizards, what should I do? The others are fine, but the key is ZD and Song Su. In an instant, the young knight scanned his surroundings. The others were also looking at him. Looking at these people's complicated gazes, Jin's hesitation suddenly disappeared, and he made a decision. "I said, I will not abandon anyone," Jin said firmly. "Baya will not be an exception." Everyone was shocked. Jin was about to move, but ZD grabbed Jin's arm and pointed to the northwest. "Sir, look over there. Please be careful." Jin saw the leader of the scorpions, the silver-ranked golden spear battle scorpion, had already rushed to the vicinity. The lizards did not have a silver-ranked leader. No matter how many black iron or bronze-ranked lizards there were, they could not stop it. The silver-ranked battle scorpion rampaged, its pincers like door planks guarding against the countless streams of acid that shot at it. At the same time, its scorpion tail kept stabbing, each time taking the life of a lizard. "It's coming for me." Jin felt as if a bolt of lightning flashed across his head. In order to provoke the scorpions, he had fiercely slashed at the battle scorpion, but there was no result. On the contrary, his arm was pierced by the scorpion tail, and he had no choice but to flee in a sorry state. The silver-ranked battle scorpion was very vengeful. It had forcefully led the scorpions to chase Jinjin for a long distance. Now that it had killed all the lizards, it wanted to find trouble with Jinjin. "You must be careful. I will be back soon." Jinjin nodded to ZD, his heart slightly warm. The spider blade in Jin's hands was extremely sharp. With one slash, a lizard fell to the ground, unable to get up again. Jinjin quickly came to Baya's side. "Sir." Baya, who was in a desperate situation, saw Jinjin come to save him and was extremely excited. His eyes were filled with gratitude, admiration, and love. With Baya, Jinjin killed his way back and successfully reunited with the others. The thing that Jinjin was worried about did not happen. ZD, Song Su, and the others did not suffer any losses. "Follow me and leave this place." Jin's tone was calm as he charged in front again. "Yes, sir." Everyone responded in unison. Jinjin returned with Baya, and the morale of the entire team immediately soared. At this moment, in everyone's eyes, the young man seemed to be shrouded in a layer of light. Jinjin had once said that he would not give up on anyone. Jinjin saved Song Su and rescued Baya under the threat of the leader of the scorpions. He had fulfilled his promise. He had also let everyone understand his will. Nothing was more convincing than actual actions. At this moment, everyone was completely convinced by Jinjin. Finally, they really killed their way out of the encirclement. Jinjin looked back. The lizards were in chaos, and there were no pursuers. Previously, when he saved Baya, he was still worried about the leader of the scorpion pack. He did not expect that the final scene would be a fierce battle between the lizards and the silver battle scorpions. Both sides had no time to care about Jinjin and the others. In the end, Jinjin easily led everyone to escape. Exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Jinjin still had a sense of worry. He did not know why, but he felt that it would not be so easy to escape from the Golden Spear Scorpion Pack. Chapter 54. The sun fiercely baked the tawny desert. Under the torment of the sun, the sand dune could only lie limp. The air was distorted by the scorching heat. A man stepped on the hot sand step by step, slowly moving forward. This man was thin, his eyes were swollen, and his gaze was lifeless. When he walked, he panted heavily, like a mechanical puppet. He was not alone. There was an unconscious man on his back. The man on his back had his eyes tightly shut. Even though he was unconscious, his eyebrows were still tightly knitted, twisting into a knot. This was because his back was injured and the pain was tormenting him. In comparison, the unconscious man's physique was more robust, while the walking man was thinner. Although there were differences in physique, the two men's faces were very similar, showing that they were closely related. It was the brothers Huang Zhao and Lan Zhao. Ever since they saw ZD, Song Su, and the others surrounded by lizards on the sand dune, under Huang Zhao's insistence, the two brothers secretly escaped from the green lizard's nest. However, along the way, they still encountered lizards that wandered outside. In order to save Huang Zhao's life, Lan Zhao bravely blocked the acid spray for his brother. And because of this, Lan Zhao was seriously injured and fell into a coma. The desert stretched as far as the eye could see, seemingly without end. Huang Zhao carried Lan Zhao on his back for a long time. He was thirsty and hungry, and his stomach had been growling for a long time. What tormented him even more was the feeling of thirst. Right now, his throat was almost smoking, and his tightly shut lips were dry and cracked. Every time he breathed through his nose, the scorching hot air was like lava pouring into his throat. Water, water! Lan Zhao's weak call came into his ears. Cyanobacteria was still unconscious, and this call came entirely from his survival instinct. The call broke Huang Zhao's dazed state. He blinked and stopped in his tracks. Then, he used one hand to support his brother, and the other hand to touch Lan Zhao's forehead. Lan Zhao's forehead was even hotter than the sand under his feet. Huang Zhao's heart also sank. Lan Zhao was unconscious and had a high fever. This was definitely not a good sign. Under normal circumstances, if the patient's condition was too serious, they would have to seek treatment from the divine arts. The priests from the Temple of Life in the Sacred Empire were very good at healing. But now, the two brothers were on this dangerous and unpredictable island in the middle of the desert, where there were no traces of people. How could they find the priest of the Temple of Life? Perhaps I should have worked with my brother to save Miss CD. She has potions. Even if she doesn't, she can still concoct potions. Thinking of this, a trace of regret appeared in her heart. But shortly after, he shook his head inwardly. No, Miss Zidi, Tsong Su, and the rest are dead meat. They must be dead by now. They were eaten by the lizards and then pooped out. No matter how good-looking a person is, how noble a person is, how knowledgeable a person is, how young a person is, they will only be a pile of shit. I don't want to become a pile of shit. Brother, you have to hold on, Huang Zhao said her heart. He took a step forward and set off again. Water, water! Lan Zhao still called out from time to time, but his voice was getting weaker and weaker. Huang Zhao wanted to smile bitterly, but he didn't have the strength to move the muscles on his face. I want water too, even if I have to exchange everything I have. Huang Zhao shouted in his heart. But didn't we use all our water to clean your wounds? My brother, I swear if I find water now, Even if it's a lake, I will drink it dry. Huang Zhao, who was secretly furious, was stunned on the spot in the next moment. Turning around the sand dune in front of him, his field of vision suddenly widened. There really was an oasis in front of him. Huang Zhao was stunned. Immediately, he reacted. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, revealing a look of ecstasy. He shouted, "Oasis, it's an oasis. Brother, we have water, we have water." Just like last time, when we were teleported here, we found an oasis. Now we have encountered an oasis again. Aha, we are saved. Brother, we are saved. Huang Zhao carried Lan Zhao on his back and ran towards the oasis at an unprecedented speed. Ecstasy seemed to have endowed him with endless physical strength. The originally heavy Lan Zhao was now as light as straw. However, no matter how much he ran, the distance between him and the oasis didn't shorten at all. Suddenly, Huang Zhao's legs went soft, and his whole body fell to the sand. Lan Zhao, who was on his back, also fell to the ground. He even rolled a few times, still unconscious. Huang Zhao raised his head. Sand covered his face, and the oasis in his field of vision suddenly disappeared. Huang Zhao was stunned. Because of the fierce run just now, his chest was constantly rising and falling, and he was panting heavily. No. Huang Zhao knelt on the ground, holding his head with both hands and pulling his hair. The despair after hope made him feel even more miserable. This isn't real. This isn't real. He stretched out his hand, 5 fingers spread, and reached in the direction where the oasis illusion used to be, but he couldn't catch it. It's fake, it's fake. Huang Zhao had no strength left. The mad run just now had squeezed out the last of his strength, but because of his emotions, he neglected his own true state. In the end, he fell to the ground because his body couldn't bear it and broke away. There was no oasis. It was just a mirage. Everything was empty. The sun was still hot, and the desert was vast and boundless. Huang Zhao was like a small insect in the middle. Tiny, pitiful, laughable. The elder brother that he had once relied on was now unconscious, lying motionless on the sand not far away. At this moment, an unprecedented sense of helplessness enveloped Huang Zhao's body and mind. He finally felt the pressure of surviving alone. He could no longer use his previous state of confusion to resist. Breathe, breathe, don't be afraid. Huang Zhao told himself. Breathe. I feel like I can't breathe. In the next moment, Huang Zhao grabbed the clothes on his chest. Fear, helplessness, desolation, sadness, and other emotions were so strong that they blocked his chest, his throat, and his nose, almost suffocating him. I don't want to die. Finally, Huang Zhao burst into tears. Huff, huff, huff. Zhang Jin's chest rose and fell violently as he panted heavily. He was also in a bad state. The injury on his arm didn't get better under ZD's treatment. The wound turned into pus, and he had a low fever. Although water and food were given to him first, he couldn't be said to be full. So he was still hungry and thirsty. Whether it was hunger, thirst, or injuries, they all made his limbs feel weak. But now, Zhang threw all these to the back of his mind. He focused all his attention on the great enemy in front of him. The one confronting him was the silver-level magic beast, the leader of the Golden Spear Scorpions. After successfully breaking through and shaking off the green-skinned lizards, Zhang Jin's worries quickly turned into reality. Under the leadership of the leader, the scorpions chased after Zhang Jin and the others after killing the lizards. The exploration team's speed couldn't compare to these horse-sized giant scorpions, and they were quickly caught up. Zhang Jin had no choice but to step forward and confront the leader of the scorpions. This wasn't the 4th time they fought. Both sides were still evenly matched. The silver-level battle, Scorpion hissed and slowly retreated. After a certain distance, it turned and left. There were a few new wounds on its body. These were all caused by Zhang Jin, but the scorpion shell was really too hard. Even if Zhang Jin used all his strength to slash, he couldn't completely cut through this layer of shell. If I can activate my fighting energy, Whether it's to increase my own strength or to add sharpness to my weapon, I can kill this scorpion. Zhenjin sighed secretly. Seeing the leader of the Golden Spear Scorpion retreat, the others didn't cheer. At first, when they saw Zhenjin forcing the leader of the Scorpion group to retreat, they cheered. But then they realized that the silver-level magic beast didn't really leave. Instead, it followed Zhenjin under the protection of the Scorpion group. After a period of time, the leader of the Scorpion group seemed to catch its breath and rushed up again, starting a one-on-one battle with Zhenjin. After several fierce battles, Zhenjin was very tired. He used up too much physical strength and energy. After meeting up with ZD, Song-Su, and the others, he didn't really rest. But he didn't dare to show the slightest bit of weakness, fearing that the Scorpion group would swarm him after seeing his weakness. Zhenjin could barely fight against the leader of the Scorpion group, but once the battle started, he couldn't even protect himself, let alone the others. "Sir, please let me check your injuries." Seeing that the battle was over, ZD immediately came to Zhenjin's side and carefully checked the wounds on Zhenjin's body. There were many new wounds on Zhenjin's body. Some of them were caused by the corrosion of acid, but most of them were caused by the leader of the Scorpion group. She took out a medicine and sprinkled it on Zhenjin's wounds. However, she was helpless against the injuries on Zhenjin's arms. The young girl frowned and kept shaking her head. "Sir, the injuries on your arms are worsening. My medicine has no effect on it. Sigh, if I had enough materials, perhaps I could make a medicine to alleviate the injuries." Zhenjin patted the back of the young girl's hand and said with a gentle smile, "Miss ZD, you've already done well enough. My strength has given me a body that far surpasses that of ordinary people. Once I'm injured, I need even more effective medicine to have an effect. But low-level magic medicines are completely useless here. The effects of the herbs you've made are already amazing. You've already done your best." The young girl was silent for a while, then analyzed with a serious expression. "Actually, the Scorpion's golden spear doesn't have any poison. Although the injury on your arms is very big, it's enough to heal by relying on your own recovery ability. But now, we can't get rid of the Scorpion group. Sir, you can only continuously fight with the leader of the Scorpion group and continuously squeeze out the energy and physical strength in your body. Every fierce battle will pull on your wounds. There's no rest at all and no time to recover." "That's right, sir. If this continues, I'm afraid we'll die in the hands of these scorpions." Someone interrupted. The others were also deeply worried. Everyone could see that Zhenjin's condition was getting worse. In the current situation, everyone was relying on Zhenjin to survive. If Zhenjin fell, even if they resisted with all their strength, they would only become the Scorpion group's meal. Chapter 55. Zhenjin glanced around and immediately understood that everyone's hearts were wavering. The young knight knew exactly what they were thinking. As the leader, he could ignore his own injuries first, but he had to consider the entire team first. Zhenjin knew that in such a desperate situation, watching themselves slide towards death step by step, but there was nothing they could do. Most people would break down, go crazy, or even go crazy. Therefore, he chuckled and comforted them. "Everyone, you should be glad that this Golden Spear Scorpion group treated us as a group of beasts. The Scorpion leader and I started a battle between kings. Unless the outcome is decided, the Scorpion group will not attack us in full force. Indeed, it's all thanks to you that we're still alive, Lord Zhenjin." "But that's true. Sooner or later, we'll also..." While the exploration team members echoed, they also hesitated. Zhenjin continued, "As long as we're still alive, there's a lot of hope. For example, if we encounter other people, get support, and be saved. Or if there's another sandstorm to disrupt everything, or if the teleportation is activated again, we'll leave this place directly." Everyone looked at each other. Was the Lord Zhenjin too optimistic? Then, everyone spoke. "Lord Zhenjin, we've been teleported twice and calculated the time. It's about half a month. We just teleported here a few days ago. It's basically impossible for us to be teleported again now. If there's such a terrifying sandstorm again, we'll all be doomed. Now that we're trapped in the desert, we don't know how big the desert is or where we are exactly. Who can save us? The possibility is too small. Everyone spoke in twos and threes, looking very depressed. Jinjin maintained a smile. But it's still possible, isn't it? When you were trapped in the dune, did you ever think that I would save you? After I met up with you, did I ever think that the Scorpion group would come help us? Everyone looked at each other again and fell into silence for a moment. They had to admit that Zhun Jin's words made sense. So, don't ever give up hope. Zhun Jin sighed and said solemnly, as long as we keep hope and never give up, we will still have the hope and possibility of survival before death really comes. My lord, you're right. With my lord here, we have hope. Everyone's eyes lit up slightly, and their morale was boosted by Jinjin. But Jinjun immediately changes the thread of discussion. However, it is not the behavior of a brave man to only hope for help and change from the outside. What's more reliable is that we save ourselves. Jinjin glanced around. His gaze paused slightly on ZD before finally stopping on Song-Su. Old scholar, what do you think? ZD had almost used up all her potions. The strongest powder she had could release a thick green acidic mist. However, they had tried many times before, and the acid mist was useless against the scorpions. The desert was very barren, and ZD lacked the materials to create new potions. Therefore, Zhun Jin was looking forward to Song-Su's performance. Song-Su sensed Jin Jin's expectant gaze and shook his head with a bitter smile. I'm sorry, Lord Jin Jin, but I don't have any way to change the situation. In fact, I've always been very confused. Why is this scorpion group chasing after my lord? The biggest threat to them living here was probably those green-skinned lizards. However, they let go of the defeated lizards and are still chasing after my lord. According to what my lord told me, goldstones are the scorpion's food. They don't eat meat. However, the scorpion group has always listed us as their primary target. This is very illogical. Someone muttered, what's the point of paying attention to common sense in this damn place? Maybe when Lord Jinjin provoked the scorpion group, he caused them great damage, causing them to hate my lord. Therefore, they have been chasing after him and have never given up. Zhun Jin shook his head. I did kill a few scorpions, but it's definitely not comparable to the number of casualties the green lizards caused to the scorpion group. As for the silver battle scorpion, I've fought with it before. The wound on my arm was caused by it, and my blade only left a white mark on its head. It seems that we have to kill a spear scorpion and dissect its corpse to see its body structure. Only then can we understand the secrets hidden within. Song-Su gave his own suggestion. He had a point of view. The structure of a creature to a large extent determined the habits of a creature. Zhun Jin agreed with this point of view. In fact, in the process of exploration and survival in the past, he had benefited a lot in this aspect. However, the scorpion group was right in front of them, so killing them and dissecting them was a very risky thing to do. Now it was a battle of kings. The scorpion group did not attack, but watched the battle between the leader and Zhun Jin every time. If the exploration team rashly attacked one of the scorpions and dissected it, how would the scorpions react? It was very likely that they would launch a group attack, and the exploration team, with only a few people left, would be easily destroyed by the scorpion group. It was too risky to attack ordinary spear scorpions rashly. Jin Jin's team needed a good opportunity. The sun was slowly setting. It was no longer impossible to look directly at it. It hung in the western sky, like a round piece of iron that had been burned red after being out of the oven. The sunlight became dim, and the barren desert turned into a withered yellow color. Zhun Jin and the others moved forward in the desert. Everyone's faces were haggard. Their lips were dry and cracked. Their eyes were swollen. Their stomachs were rumbling with hunger, and their legs were sore. Food and water had begun to be supplied with the minimum amount. The scorpion group was far behind them. Along the way, they frantically searched for something to eat. However, The insects and lizards had long been frightened away by the scorpion group. Even if they encountered a few plants, under Song Su's reminder, the exploration team members had no choice but to give up. These few scattered plants grew alone in the desert. Their branches and leaves were thin and dry, and their roots were developed. They went deep into the ground. These plants could not be eaten, and some of them were poisonous. Once they were stabbed and bled, they would be poisoned. Song Su identified these plants and made everyone not dig rashly, saving everyone's strength. When night fell, Zhenjin and the others saw huge stones. These were gold hemp stones. The exploration team members were not surprised. The road was led by Zhenjin. This place was the natural camp that Zhenjin had once rested at night. It was also their first destination for escape this time. With the gold hemp stones for heating, Zhenjin and the others will be able to survive the bone-chilling desert night. They could even place their dry food on the gold hemp stones and heat it up before eating it. If they were in other places without the gold hemp stones, they would have to light a fire for heating. Starting a fire required materials, and there was too little wood in the desert. If they wanted to start a fire, they would probably have to burn their own clothes as fuel. Here, they did not have the trouble of having to start a fire, and they saved a lot of survival resources. Food and water were the most important survival resources. The clothes on their bodies could keep out the cold and prevent sunburn. It was also an important survival resource. The night wind blew gently on their faces. The moonlight shone on the desert. Standing on the largest gold hemp stone, Zhenjin withdrew his gaze from the distance. Although the scorpion group had also entered the gold hemp stone group, just like Zhenjin and the others, they had shrunk their group and were resting in a corner. They had no intention of attacking. Zhenjin heaved a sigh of relief. This situation was more advantageous to him. Ordinary people's vision was greatly limited at night. Zhenjin, who did not have the help of battle chi, was no exception. Compared to humans, wild beasts, especially the predators among them, had excellent night vision. As for how far these spear scorpions could see in the night, Zhenjin did not know. Just in case, the night watch would not be missing. Jumping off the gold hemp stone, Zhenjin found that Song Su was kneeling on the ground, squinting his eyes and staring at the map in his hand. Although there was no fire, the moon was high in the sky, and the light was not bad. From time to time, Song Su would use his finger to draw some lines on the sand. Noticing that Zhenjin had come to his side, Song Su raised his head and continued to draw lines on the sand. "Sir, I'm guessing our position, the size of the desert, and the direction of the oasis," Song Su explained without raising his head. Zhenjin nodded. "Is there any progress?" "Sigh, my lord, you have to understand that this work is difficult." The old scholar sighed deeply. "We lack enough information. We don't know how big the island is, how big the desert is, and where we are on the island. When we were teleported to the desert, we were lucky enough to find the oasis. But the desert lacks landmarks, and we have no way to determine how far the oasis is from the path we have taken. If the sun and moon are not man-made, and what we have observed is real, and there is no change in our route, then we can at least be sure of our direction. If the owner of the island did not interfere too much, then this island should still be in natural terrain. Most of the islands have high terrain in the center and low terrain in the periphery. So, if we find a river and follow it, we can theoretically reach the seaside. But now we are in the desert." In the end, the old scholar sighed again. "I am sorry, my lord. I can't help you more. The current situation is quite bad, and I think we need luck, enough good luck." "Yes," Zhenjin sighed. The young man's face was full of worry as he described the current situation. "We have very little food and can only last for 2 days at most, and that is the minimum supply. What is more troublesome is the scorpion swarm, and it is difficult for us to get rid of them. I have to remind you of something, my lord," Song Su added. "The danger that the scorpion swarm brings us is not just death itself. They have been following us all along, and it is a cunning and insidious hunting technique. Just like the red-haired arrow pigs in the red sand desert, they will shoot arrows when they encounter large prey and chase after the prey, causing the prey to continuously lose blood and become weak in the intense exercise and eventually lose resistance. Maybe the scorpion swarm uses this tactic. Even if the scorpion swarm does not attack in full force, without enough food, we will become weaker. It is not only our bodies that are weak, but also our hearts. Being chased by the scorpion swarm for a long time, the pressure on us will become greater and greater, and we will become more and more fragile. Ordinary people need to maintain hope and peace in order to survive in an extreme environment. I know a lot of records, and the seemingly harmless mirage in the desert is actually very dangerous. Once the survivors in the desert don't discover the truth of the mirage and experience the huge difference between hope and disappointment, it's very easy for them to break down and give up on the principles they usually abide by, even giving up on their own lives. Chapter 56. Jinji nodded. I understand what you want to say. Thank you for your reminder. He slowly walked away from Song-Su. Although this time, the old scholar did not provide an effective strategy, and he was helpless against the scorpion's pursuit. But he still gave Jinjin a lot of help. The young knight knew that Song-Su was trying to remind him that he had to make a decision. Because as time passed, the whole team's condition would become weaker and weaker, not only physically but also mentally. If this situation was allowed to develop, it was very likely that Junjin's team would collapse before the scorpions could fully attack. Jinjin communicated with ZD again. Sir, ZD's voice sounded very weak, her back leaning against the golden stone. Her petite body was still covered by the magic robe. Now the magic robe had become dirty, and there were many holes in the hem and the back. Her amethyst-like eyes were far less bright than before, becoming dim and lacking vitality. At her own request, she ate less than the other members. In order to maintain her questioning as much as possible, she put on the hood. Under the night wind, the hair on her forehead fluttered gently. Jinjin sighed softly and could not help but feel a sense of pity. He reached out his hand and carefully brushed ZD's hair to the side to avoid covering her eyes. ZD's eyes flickered. Sir, do you think we can still escape from this island? Jinjin was immediately shocked. At this moment, ZD was so weak. The young knight suddenly realized that ZD in front of him, if all her abilities and identity were put aside, she was just a weak girl after all. She needed encouragement, comfort, and support. Of course we can, as long as we do our best. Junjin encouraged, although he also knew that these words were very weak. ZD nodded and asked again, Sir, when do you think we should kill a spear scorpion? Jinjin was silent for a moment. Let's wait and see. After talking with ZD for a while, just like Song-Su, ZD expressed that she couldn't help Jinjin much. After asking the other members, Junjin was finally alone. Whether it was ZD or Song-Su, they were both intelligent people. Both of them were very clear about the current situation. If they were to drag this out unnecessarily, they would undoubtedly die. Although they did not say it out loud, they were actually trying to persuade Jinjin to take the risk, kill a spear scorpion, dissect it, and use its body parts as materials to concoct potions. But Jinjin had his own ideas. He had seen the battle between the lizard and the golden scorpion in the midst of the golden hempstones. He was thinking, if there's another environment like this where the lizards and scorpions meet each other and fight each other, it will definitely cause chaos. Then, this will be an opportunity. The reason why Jinjin brought everyone back here was to create this opportunity. But Jinjin did not reveal his plan to the others. Why not say it out loud? Because Jinjin did not have absolute confidence. If he were to say it out loud, it would undoubtedly give everyone hope. But if the plan failed, everyone would be even more disappointed. According to the current morale of the team, Jinjin felt that disappointment after hope would greatly test everyone's psychological endurance. Song-Su had previously advised him to understand people's hearts to prevent a mental breakdown. In fact, Jinjin did not need Song-Su's advice. He had already secretly grasped this point. Late at night, on the golden hempstones, the young knight retracted his gaze from the dark night and turned to the spider blade in his hand. Under the moonlight, there was an obvious crack on the surface of the spider blade. This extremely sharp weapon could no longer be used frequently. Jinjin did not find it strange. This was normal. Strictly speaking, the spider blade was just a material, not a real sword. It originally grew on the body of the silver level blade spider. Although it was hard and sharp, it was still a part of the blade spider's body and received nutrients from the main body of the spider at all times. Only this way could the blade spider's legs maintain long-term health and sharpness. After the blade spider was killed by Jinjin, its legs were chopped off and it became a dead object, no longer receiving any nutrients. Then, these blades were continuously used and consumed. Under normal circumstances, the spider blade was an excellent material for weapons. Alchemists, blacksmiths, and others used a series of magic, alchemy, and smelting methods to process the spider blade so that it could be preserved for a long time. To truly create a long alchemy tool or magical weapon, the craftsmanship and techniques needed were more advanced and complicated. All kinds of materials were combined to form a whole, achieving the coordination of magic. Even so, the alchemy tool or magical weapon that was created needed maintenance. Even if it was a divine weapon, it still needed faith or divine power. The spider blade in Junjin's hands did not receive any maintenance from beginning to end, and it was only attached to the hilt. It could be said to be extremely crude. Damage was its inevitable fate. In the past 2 days, Junjin had used the spider blade to fight with the spear scorpions, accelerating the wear and tear of the spider blade. The scorpion's shell was extraordinarily hard. Junjin used all his strength and could only leave shallow slash marks on the silver spear scorpion's shell. The other spear scorpions also had to use a lot of effort to cut through the scorpion's shell. At this moment, Junjin, who was alone, looked at the cracked spider blade in his hands and could not help but think, how long can this weapon last? Can he rely on it to kill the silver spear scorpion? Then he thought of himself. Then how about me? How long can I last? Since the second teleportation, the young knight was like a sword in his hands. He never got any rest, did not have enough food and water, and went through long-distance raids, bravely breaking out of encirclement and so on. He was fiercely squeezing his physical strength and energy and was faintly reaching his limit. This spider blade is no longer reliable. Then what else can I rely on? This time, Junjin began to forget about God. He knew that divine spells were an extravagant hope. His only trump card was the mutation. Relying on the mutation of his body, he killed the silver level blade spider and the dangerous flying squirrel. But the ability to mutate was very unreliable. After the teleportation, it was not triggered. Jinjin did not know the reason. He had guessed and felt that there were 2 relatively big possibilities. The first possibility was that he was not on the verge of death, his emotions were not intense, and did not meet the conditions to trigger the mutation. The second possibility was that the magic crystal in his heart lacked magic, and was not enough for him to mutate a 3rd time. Thinking about it carefully, the first mutation had sharp claws, the second mutation had arms as thick as a bear, and the second mutation was less severe than the first. And during the second mutation, Junjin had already noticed that the magic crystal in his heart was greatly weakened. As for combat energy, on top of the huge golden stone, Junjin frowned slightly. Even if I can remember the key content and know how to use combat energy, the suppression of this island also makes it impossible for me to use combat energy. In fact, with the help of combat energy, it would be very easy to kill the silver spear scorpion. Of course, this was on the premise that the combat energy of silver level and above was used. The night was vast, and the cold night wind blew Junjin's blonde hair, slightly swaying. The young knight no longer looked at the sword in his hand, and cast his gaze on the moon hanging high above his head. Under the moonlight, like a thin veil, it covered Junjin's handsome face and seeped into his blonde hair, making the young man's slightly furrowed brows gradually relax. The corner of Junjin's mouth slowly raised, and he actually let out a silent laugh. At this moment, he was in a vast sea of sand, and the surroundings were quiet, as if he was the only one left facing the vast world, the universe, and nature. The young man's heart was filled with endless emotions. Compared to nature, what am I? My struggle, my resistance, my ambition, my responsibility, to me is very important, more important than my life. But in this world, they are very small, like grains of sand. My fight with the scorpions and lizards is only a small part of the countless races in nature, in the endless competition for reproduction and survival. Jean felt deeply, but he was not discouraged or depressed at all. He found that his heart was very calm, without a trace of anxiety, or sorrow. On the contrary, he was very calm and collected. This was completely different from before. Not long ago, he led the entire exploration team and faced the crisis of food shortage. He decided to deal with the rats and make short bows. He bravely took on the responsibility of a leader. But during the whole process, although he was calm on the surface, his heart was filled with panic, helplessness, anxiety, and other emotions. The current situation was much worse than before, but the young knight's heart was very calm. Suffering was a gift of fortune from fate. Jean received this fortune, and he obtained a considerable amount of growth. This was not a growth in cultivation or battle strength, but a rise in the state of mind. It was like a butterfly breaking free from a thick cocoon. Chapter 57. The night passed. The morning sun brushed past the horizon, leaving a faint shadow on the ground. The exploration team members had already woken up. They were awakened by the sound of the scorpions eating. Jean did not show the slightest hint of joy or anger. His face was calm. However, he could not help but feel disappointed. It was different from what he had expected. The sun rose, but the reality was still cold. The lizards did not come. It seemed that the lizards had lost their silver-level leader, or it was possible that the last massacre by the scorpions had frightened the lizards and made them lose the will to fight, so they did not dare to come here again. The entire scorpions were eating. Although Su had heard Junjin's description before, this was the first time he had seen it with his own eyes. The old scholar could not help but exclaim, "Nature is really too great. It created such a magical animal. These spear scorpions eat these stones, but they are actually feeding on metal. Their digestive system is very strong and special. They can actually consume all kinds of metals and add these metals to their shells. It is precisely because of this that the scorpion shells are so tough." Wait a minute. One of the exploration team members was doubtful. Isn't there a powerful mage on this island? Weren't these strange monsters created by this sorcerer? Su smiled and shook his head. In fact, this is impossible. No matter how powerful the owner of this island is, he only used the life in nature and then pieced it together. It's just like how mages make puppet golems. They use metal to make the body of the golem, and then take the soul to instill it into the golem to form intelligence. It's just like cutting pieces of a picture and piecing these pieces together. After a pause, Su continued, "If the owner of this island can really create things, then he or she is the creator completely above all the emperors and dukes in the world. As far as I know, there are many gods in the world. The Shengming Emperor, several dukes in the human race, the great chief of the orcs, the great shaman, and so on. None of them can reach the level of directly creating life." ZD obviously agreed with Su's words. She also said, "Although the creatures on this island are dangerous and strange, they are not perfect. The magic in their bodies was not coordinated. If the island master was an artisan, he could completely stabilize the mana within their bodies. Strictly speaking, the gold tier demons on this island could only be considered as quasi-gold tier. They could not be compared to the real gold tier demons. They don't have gold tier magic." No one had any objections. Magical beasts usually had similar spells. However, none of the ferocious beasts they had encountered on this island had such spells. The reason why the flying squirrel could discharge electricity was because it had a tissue structure similar to that of an electric eel. Lizards can spit acid because they have sacs that store acid. Venomous snakes can spit venom because they have venom glands in their heads. The essence of this type of spell was to use the magical power in the magical crystals of magical beasts to create something out of nothing, ignoring and bypassing the structure of the creature's body. It was like fighting aura or magic, allowing the body to reach a power that surpassed the limits of an individual or race. But the silence didn't last long. One of the exploration team members mumbled, "Even if the magic power of these monsters can't be coordinated, they're still very powerful. If we can't think of a way to get rid of the scorpions, we'll all die at the hands of these scorpions. Even if these scorpions don't eat meat, we'll still be pierced into minced meat by them. I curse the master of this island. No matter how powerful he is, he must be very vicious and dangerous when he created these things. The tails of these scorpions were all made into spear tips by him. The acid of the lizards can even corrode steel. No matter what kind of big shot he is, what kind of research he wants to do, if I die here, I'll turn into a vengeful spirit, a resentful spirit, and entangle him tightly, letting him taste the pain I suffered when I was alive." When Song Su heard this, he suddenly let out a long sigh. He turned to ZD and said, "Miss ZD, I'm gradually agreeing with your previous speculation." Everyone was puzzled. ZD understood what Song Su meant and smiled. "Are you saying that you also think that the Island Master is creating biological weapons?" "Yes." Song Su was still squatting on the ground. He nodded slightly and glanced at the people around him. "We guessed that there were a lot of man-made traces on this island and speculated that the Island Master was very likely a mage. I previously thought that she created these monsters for some kind of magical research. Perhaps he was seeking the profound meaning of life so that he could make some kind of breakthrough. But after experiencing so much and seeing all kinds of magical beasts, I'm more inclined to miss ZD's guess. If he studies a certain field of magic and seeks the profound meaning of life, he should make artificial life more stable. But the artificial creatures here are all fierce and fierce. The scorpion is the size of a warhorse, and its tail has been modified into a spear tip. The lizard can spit acid and corrode swords. The flying squirrel can release strong electricity, and it seems to be deliberately targeting the metal armor. These creatures were created for the sake of improving their combat prowess. Lord Jinjin, I remember you said that you've encountered blade spiders, single-horned black panthers, brown bears that can eat ores to heal themselves, and even cunning blue wolves that have human intelligence. These beasts, rather than being created for research, are more like special weapons that can be created. Zhen Jin thought for a moment. We didn't just encounter these beasts. Don't forget, we also encountered a flock of sheep. Those sheep are very weak. Song Su shook his head and insisted. Although the sheep are weak and can be slaughtered by us, but the proportion of creatures like sheep is too small. More importantly, I think these sheep are more powerful than most magical beasts. Everyone was puzzled by Song Su's opinion. Song Su continued to explain, the Island Master wants to create the strongest biological weapon, but in fact her technology is not mature. There's one biggest flaw, and that is that the magic power that transforms life can't be coordinated and can't form magic crystals. Therefore, the Island Master modified the environment and suppressed the operation of elements and magic power. When we are in it, we can't use chi and magic. From this point, we can see the power of the sheep. The magic power in the other magical beasts is chaotic and quickly dissipates after death. But the magic power in the sheep has a tendency to stabilize. Although the temperature rises, the magic power is still chaotic and will quickly dissipate. But when the temperature is low, the magic power in their bodies is restrained and hidden, and we can't even detect it. It was precisely because they couldn't detect it that there was the poisoning of the exploration team. From this, it can be seen that the Island Master is trying to develop magic crystals. Although she can't directly create them, he seems to be using the food chain of nature to indirectly promote the production of magic crystals. In order to promote the production of magic crystals as soon as possible, as well as to test and train the combat strength of these biological weapons, the Island Master set up a teleportation array. Every once in a while, after the array is activated, the magical beasts are teleported to fight each other, and the winner will be determined, which is the qualified biological weapon. Of course, Sangsu knew that the magic power in the sheep's bodies was actually brought in by eating the local grass. But this secret still needed to be kept. At this moment, in front of everyone, he deliberately said this. This didn't stop him from expressing his conjecture. To be honest, Zhanjin was immediately shocked by this conjecture. There's a magic crystal in my heart. How can a human have a magic crystal? This magic crystal is very likely to be accidentally produced when ZD instilled the bear's blood in me to save me in the cave of the brown monkey bear. So, I solved the research problem of the Island Master. The magic crystal in my heart is actually an artificial magic crystal created indirectly with the help of the Island Master's power. If the Island Master finds out, what will happen to me? Sangsu's conjecture also made the others suck in a cold breath. Then what should we do? Maybe the Island Master has already found out about us and is just letting us struggle here. That's right. She may be watching us now, using us to test the power of his creations. Then won't we be dead for sure? Why should we continue to struggle? Surrender? Yes, we can surrender. All right. Zhanjin spoke, forcing himself to be calm and looking serious. It's too early to say this. Everything is just a conjecture. We should set off. But everyone's expressions were still flustered and confused. Zhanjin sighed. Have you seen the Island Master? Is there any evidence to prove Sangsu's conjecture? If you want to give up, think you're dead for sure, or want to surrender, then do it. But if you want to continue to follow me, then you should go now. This time, everyone no longer hesitated and chose to follow closely behind Zhanjin. Chapter 58. Not long after the exploration team left the Golden Stones, someone was horrified to discover that the Scorpion Horde had followed them again. Their hopes were dashed. Facts proved that Zhanjin's previous approach was correct. The young knight sighed inwardly. Sangsu's speculation made him panic in his heart, but on the surface, his expression was calm and composed. Don't worry, the scorpions have just eaten their fill, and we are not on their food list. That Scorpion King will continue to fight alone with me. As long as I don't fall, all of you will be safe. Everyone was successfully comforted by Zhanjin. The group continued to move forward in the desert. They had to cherish the early morning. This was a good opportunity to hurry on their journey. Logically speaking, this was only an island. The island was divided into many kinds of landforms, and the desert on the island should not be large. As long as they were determined in one direction and kept moving forward, they would be able to walk out of this nightmare. However, the people who were in it felt different. Yellow sand that filled the sky. Sand dunes, undulating sand dunes. The identical scene made it easy for people to think that they had not traveled far. The desert seemed to be endless. No matter how they walked, they could not reach the end. Their physical strength was rapidly depleted. Just after morning, the exploration team members felt hungry. There was really too little food. Confusion and despair were inevitable, and they could not help but grow in everyone's hearts. Every time this happened, the exploration team members' gazes would be cast on Zhanjin. Zhanjin led the way at the front. He was just a teenager, and his figure was not taller than the others. However, the exploration team members often drew courage from Zhanjin's thin back. This courage fought against the confusion and despair in their hearts. The sun gradually rose, and the temperature of the desert rose rapidly. Sweat began to appear on the foreheads of the exploration team members. About 2 to 3 hours later, the silver spear scorpion suddenly let out an ear-piercing shriek. Its scorpion feet quickly gathered the sand under its feet, and it left the scorpion horde, charging towards the exploration team. It's coming. The exploration team was in an uproar, but they immediately calmed down. Because Jean was already prepared, he immediately stopped and turned around, facing the spear scorpion. Both sides engaged in a fierce battle, just like yesterday. After fighting for a while, the silver spear scorpion took the initiative to retreat and leave the battle. Jean panted heavily and did not pursue. The young knight's mood became heavier and heavier. Is it just my imagination? I keep feeling that this scorpion shell is harder than before. Is it because I've lost too much of my spider blade? Or did the spear scorpion's carapace thicken after eating? Jean was getting more and more helpless against this spear scorpion. Every slash he made on the scorpion's shell only left a white mark. Furthermore, the marks were getting fainter and fainter. Unless I mutate and turn into sharp bear claws. Otherwise, with just this weapon in my hand, there's no way I can threaten spear scorpion. Also, my stamina is weakening. Jean could clearly feel this. Previously, when he was fighting with the silver spear scorpion, he was able to move around and had a lot of stamina. Now, the battle would only last for a short while, and his breathing would become rapid and his limbs would become weak. Over the past few days, Jean hadn't been able to eat or sleep well. He hadn't had any effective rest at all. He was like the spider blade in his hand, which had already seen its limit. Compared to the spear scorpion and other ferocious beasts, there was a racial difference in weakness. Against spear scorpion, Needle Gold used his weakness to attack the enemy's strength. Fortunately, as a leader, the spear scorpion seemed to be very cautious. Every time it fought with Jean for a while, it seemed to realize that it was difficult to take down Jean, so it retreated temporarily. According to Tsang Su, this might be the spear scorpion's hunting technique. Every battle weakened Jean a little. After accumulating, Jean was finally exhausted to the limit, and it was difficult for him to explode at the moment of death. This might be the survival technique of the scorpion horde. However, for Jean, it was something to be thankful for. The scorpion's habit gave him a chance to catch his breath. After 4 such battles, the sun rose to the highest point in the sky. At noon, the sun was extremely fierce. The sea of sand under their feet was steaming hot. The members of the exploration team felt like fish and shrimp on a red-hot iron plate. For the sake of long-term consideration, everyone could only avoid the sun and temporarily catch their breath in the limited shadows behind a sand dune. The scorpion horde was also afraid of the scorching sun and stopped attacking. Under the witness of the exploration team, these scorpions waved their pincers, twisted their bodies, and burrowed into the depths of the sand. This kind of good way to avoid the summer heat made the members of the exploration team express their envy. Do you think these scorpions will ambush us from underground? Someone expressed his worry. Then let them come. I've had enough of this kind of damn life. Someone sat on the ground weakly. Tsang Su still maintained his rationality and analyzed. The scorpion's body is there. If they want to crawl out, it will definitely cause a huge commotion. We will definitely discover it first. This is not their hunting method. Think about it. How did they deal with those green lizards? Only then did everyone relax. ZD began to distribute the food, which could be considered today's lunch. Everyone only had a small portion of dry food, which was less than half the size of a palm. Fortunately, the water reserves were relatively sufficient. However, under Tsang Su's guidance, everyone pursed their lips and stopped after 2 or 3 sips. Then, they carefully stuffed the stopper and tied the water bag tightly to their waists. They cherished it as if it was the most valuable treasure in the world. Among everyone, Jean had the most food. After all, he consumed the most energy and was the biggest guarantee for everyone's safety. Even so, this food was far from enough for Jean. The young knight could only eat in small bites, as if eating like this could give his stomach the illusion that he had eaten more. During the meal, Jean was also secretly observing the team. At present, although everyone was haggard and tired, their lips were dry and cracked, and their eyes were dim, their emotions were generally stable. Baya's face was the palest. His arm was broken when he resisted the lizards and was currently tied up, but the pain was still tormenting the young man. The old scholar Song Su was gently tapping his calf with his hand. He was relaxing his muscles. To be honest, with his body, it was already very surprising that he could last until now. Finally, Zhenjin came to ZD's side. "How are you?" he asked softly. "I'm fine." ZD shook her head. Her amethyst-like eyes were filled with determination. She had a magic robe on her, which should have the function of adjusting the temperature. However, on this island, it seemed to be ineffective and could not isolate the heat. This caused ZD's forehead to be dripping with sweat. Her beautiful hair was wet and condensed into strands. This was not a good sign. Excessive sweating would cause the body's water content to rapidly decrease. In the long run, people would die of dehydration. Jin Jun's heart gave birth to a feeling of love and pity. He knew the reason. Everyone had water and dry food, but most of the food was concentrated in one place, on ZD's body. This put a burden on ZD, increasing her physical strength to walk. There were many reasons for this. While Zhenjin was resisting the scorpions, he was also on guard against the people in the same group. Hunger and thirst were unbearable. The instinct to survive was extremely strong. It could make people crazy and take risks out of desperation. The food and water reserves maintained this small group and also maintained Zhenjin's authority. Zhenjin did not feel at ease leaving it to other people. ZD was the one he trusted the most. At the same time, ZD's medicine also had a huge deterrent effect. "Lord Zhenjin, I will not let you down. It's just that. Sir, what about you?" ZD looked at Zhenjin with concern. The girl was very smart. She knew that when the two of them were together, Zhenjin had taken care of the main luggage. But now, Zhenjin had handed all these things to her. It was obvious that the battle with the Silver Spear Scorpion had exhausted him. "I'm fine. I can still hold on." Zhenjin smiled and raised his voice slightly. "Don't forget my strength. I will only fall if you fall. I will definitely be the last one to fall." Hearing this, everyone naturally felt relieved. But at this moment, a member of the exploration team suddenly fell to the ground and did not get up again. Everyone was shocked and hurriedly looked over. The person who had fainted was Baya. Baya, the nearest member of the exploration team, hurriedly went over, trying to wake him up. However, when he touched his forehead, he immediately shouted, "It's so hot. He has a high fever." It was not good to have a high fever, especially when there was a lack of divine spells and medicine to treat it. A group of people surrounded Baya. Baya was very popular. In fact, he was the most popular person in the team. This son of the hunter had helped everyone a lot when they were poisoned. Not only that, when they were hunting the flying squirrel beast, his archery skills had also helped the team a lot. However, he was now unconscious and could not be woken up no matter what. "Everyone make way." Song Su walked over, and everyone immediately made way for a small open space. "Let me try." Soon, ZD also made a move. It was not until Zhenjin put his water bag to Baya's mouth and poured a lot of water that Baya's eyes finally opened a crack. He did not have the strength to speak. Instead, he pointed at his chest. He looked very weak. Song Su was the first to understand Baya's meaning. He immediately reached out and took out a few letters from Baya's chest pocket. Seeing Song Su take out the letters, Baya's eyes seemed to sparkle. He pointed at the letters again and then fainted again. Baya. No matter what, Baya was completely unconscious this time. Is he on his last legs? Damn it, of all times, it has to happen now. I think this kid knows he's dying. These letters must have his last words. This kid can read? Isn't he the son of a hunter? Generally speaking, only nobles, mages, clergy, scholars, and so on were literate. These people only made up a small part of the empire's population. Most of them were illiterate. Everyone was discussing, and their faces showed worry, doubt, and hesitation. Baya's body is very strong. He fainted because of his injuries. He was injured because of Song Su. Someone said. Thus, many gazes were focused on Song Su. Song Su was silent, as if he did not notice the anger around him. That's enough. Zhenjin killed the signs of the conflict before it even started. He looked up at the sky. Although the sun is still strong, it's best that we move to a nearby place. Don't stay in one place for too long. The scorpions are still hiding underground. Yes, sir. Understood, Lord Junjin. Then what about Baya? Someone asked. Junjin blurted out without hesitation. Of course we'll take him with us. I'm a holy knight. I've said it before, I won't give up on anyone. I'll do my best to save everyone. Everyone's hearts trembled, and they suddenly calmed down. Chapter 59. When Baya fell, everyone was worried and angry, not only because of Baya's popularity, but also because of fear. They were afraid that they would become the next Baya, fall into a coma, and resign themselves to fate. But now, Junjin's actions made everyone understand that the young knight in front of them possessed the true virtues of a knight. The sand dunes were continuous, rising and falling one after another. There was no stretcher, so Baya was carried on the backs of people in turn. Soon, the group moved to the back of another sand dune. Sensing the movement, the scorpions emerged from the ground and followed the group to the new location, then burrowed back into the sand. After they burrow into the sand, it seems that they can't directly change their position underground, Song Su analyzed. This was good news, but it was not much better. If everyone had mounts and was fast enough, they might be able to shake off the scorpions and get rid of them. But the current situation was that the group was exhausted and their speed could not compare to the scorpions. Moreover, there was an injured person who was unconscious, greatly slowing down the group's pace. After noon, before evening, Junjin led the group and set off again. The scorpions quickly appeared behind the group. The silver spear scorpion came out of the crowd and engaged in a fierce battle with Junjin again. The battle lasted for a while, then it retreated. Junjin watched helplessly as it retreated, unable to do anything about it. The cracks on the spider blade had expanded a lot, and Junjin did not know how long this weapon could last. Without it, the situation would become very bad. Ordinary iron swords were no threat to the scorpion shell. This kind of battle happened a few more times, and the group gradually became numb from fear. Dusk came, and the sun sank near the horizon. The sky was dark, and the group's state of mind sank. Is there really no other way? Lady ZD, is there any medicine that can kill these damn scorpions? ZD shook her head. If there was, she would have used it long ago. Why don't we just stay here and perish together with these damned scorpions? Someone said irritably. That's what I'm thinking, someone agreed. There were also people who objected in a mocking tone. Perish together? You're thinking too much. If we rush forward, we will only be cut in half by that silver tear magical beast. What do you mean? What do you mean? The members of the exploration team were furious and looked at each other unhappily. Another person placed Baya on the ground and sat down. He complained, Hey, if you have the time and energy to quarrel, why don't you help me carry this guy? This kid is too heavy. It's good that he's asleep. He doesn't have to travel on his own. That's great. The quarreling duo looked at the person on the ground. One of them snorted, It's not like I haven't carried him before. I've carried him more than you. It's only been a while, and you can't take it anymore? The other man glanced at Song Su from the corner of his eyes and said sarcastically, In my opinion, the one who should carry Baya on his back is an old man. Baya was seriously injured because he was trying to save someone. Without this injury, he would still be alive and kicking. The commotion in the team began to spread from the quarrel between the two people. If it were any other time, they would have respected Song Su very much. After all, Song Su's knowledge had helped them a lot. But now, in a desperate situation, everyone was restless and fearful. They did not dare to target Junjin or ZD. They subconsciously turned their anger, panic, and other emotions into words and gazes, attacking the weakest old man in the team. Most importantly, Baya had indeed fallen into such a situation because he had saved Song Su. According to morality, Song Su should indeed be criticized. Therefore, as everyone quarreled, they focused their firepower on Song Su. Song Su remained expressionless under the mocking gazes that harbored ill intentions. Hey, old man, what do you think? Tell me. The silent Song Su made people feel that he was weak. Finally, someone chased after Song Su and provoked him. Song Su's lips curled into a sneer. Then, he glanced at the team members who provoked him with a mocking gaze. By his coma is actually a good thing. Everyone was stunned. Song Su continued. It's a critical moment. In an instant, the air seemed to freeze. The people who surrounded Song Su widened their eyes in shock. What did you say? Someone shouted. Jinjin and ZD were also in disbelief. Song Su, on the other hand, was very calm. His aged eyes were deep and cold. Why are you looking at me like that? But you can't hold on any longer. Anyone can see that. How can you say that? Yes, he's our companion. What about us? Everyone shouted, their voices sharp. Old man, are you a devil in human skin? Someone even walked up to Song Su and looked down at Song Su, pressuring him with his gaze. Song Su asked in return, not afraid at all. The current situation is that we are seriously short of food. Without food, we won't have any stamina. Without stamina, we will definitely be killed by the scorpions in the end. At that point, Bai will be dead for sure. In fact, he's already dead. This is the desert. We don't have priests or potions. Even if there are priests, low-level magic and battle energy are strictly prohibited on this island. Where are we going to find a high-ranking priest? So, we have a better chance of escaping. The exploration team member who was staring at Song Su was furious. He grabbed the old man's collar and lifted him up. You're still talking. Song Su snorted and waved his arm. With a slap, the exploration team member's arm was knocked away. The exploration team member was caught off guard and took 2 steps back. He looked at Song Su in surprise. The strength of the old man in front of him seemed to be beyond his expectations. Song Su adjusted his collar and said slowly, You've read too little. Now, I'll tell you a principle. There's an insect called a mantis. A male mantis mates with a female mantis. That night, the female mantis eats the male mantis to replenish her nutrients so that she can give birth to offspring more smoothly. A few years ago, don't be tied down. For any life form, the most basic thing is survival and reproduction. If we can't even guarantee our own survival, what law and morality are we talking about? Besides, what kind of people are you? Others don't know, but don't you know? Our ship is heading to the Orc continent. There's going to be a war there. Who would go there at this time? Song Su sneered and finally concluded, Surviving is more important than anything, isn't it? No one spoke, and the entire team fell into a dead silence. Many people were still glaring at Song Su, but their gazes were no longer as angry and hateful as before. Song Su, please take back your words. Bai is definitely not food, but our companion. Zhen Jin frowned with a stern expression. As you wish, my lord knight. Song Su's collar was tidied up. He bowed to Zhen Jin. His etiquette was very proper, and his movements were so standard that there was nothing wrong with them. As expected of a steward who had served the nobles for most of his life. The extreme heat made Zhuang Zhao open his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot, and his mind was in a mess. After waking up for a long time, he gradually reacted. He was lying at the foot of a dune, and beside him was an unconscious man. It was his brother, Lan Zhao. The cyanobacteria was motionless, still unconscious. His condition was getting worse and worse. Originally, only his lips were dry and cracked, but now his skin was peeling from the sun. Although he was still breathing, the rise and fall of his chest was obviously weaker than yesterday. Zhuang Zhao tried to sit up. He immediately felt a violent dizziness and hurriedly used his hands to support his body. I also have a fever. He touched his forehead, and suddenly his heart sank. He thought back. The night in the desert was extremely cold, and he was extremely tired. He could only sleep on the spot. He relied on the cyanobacteria, using the body heat from his high fever to resist the cold. But he still failed. He fell asleep, and when he woke up, it was already noon. Zhuang Zhao felt waves of fear. He was very glad that he did not encounter any hunting beasts during his sleep. But what now? Zhuang Zhao still had some dry food on him, but he had no water. Most of his water was used to wash Lan Zhao's wounds, and he had already drunk the rest. He He was not only trying to survive by himself, but he also had to carry an adult man who was heavier than him. After sitting on the sand for a long time, Zhuang Zhao slowly carried Lan Zhao on his back and continued on his journey. However, Zhuang Zhao's heart was filled with confusion, panic, annoyance, and despair, and it was difficult to get rid of them. The exhaustion, hunger, and dizziness of his body were like thorns, binding his body. The thorns of the thorns were deeply embedded in his flesh and bones, making it so that every time he took a step forward, it would affect these numerous wounds. Water, water! Behind him, Lan Zhao began to unconsciously murmur. Huang Zhao abruptly stopped in his tracks. He didn't know why, but a strong feeling of anger and hatred welled up in his heart. Stop talking, you're so annoying. If you weren't injured, we would definitely have water right now. In this situation, where can I find water for you to drink? I also want to drink water. I also want to... Zhuang Zhao did not care that his throat was so dry that it was about to emit smoke and shouted to vent his anger. However, Lan Zhao could not hear him. He continued to murmur, thirsting for water. Zhuang Zhao's eyes widened. A wave of hostility surged from his heart, rising to his forehead and then instantly covering his face. He suddenly let go of Lan Zhao and threw him to the ground. Stop shouting, he shouted at Lan Zhao. His eyes were filled with anger, but also carried a cruel and cold viciousness. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and his breathing became heavier and heavier. Killing intent grew in Zhuang Zhao's heart, and then it strangely grew rapidly. Zhuang Zhao stared at Lan Zhao for a long time. His Adam's apple moved subconsciously, and his eyes were filled with the green light of a hungry wolf. Hunger filled his heart and mind, making it impossible for him to think. His survival instinct constantly reminded him to ignore Lan Zhao's identity. It made him see every piece of flesh on Lan Zhao's body and every fresh blood flowing in his body. This is food. Zhuang Zhao slowly approached, slowly bent down, and then half knelt on the ground, stretching out his hands. His hands reached for Lan Zhao. His movements were very slow, as if he were carrying heavy hammers. His hands were still trembling. At first, it was only a slight tremble, but the closer he got to Lan Zhao, the more his hands trembled. Suddenly, Zhuang Zhao noticed that Lan Zhao's eyelids were trembling slightly. Immediately, the cyanobacterium slowly opened its eyes a slit. "Brother, you're awake," Zhuang Zhao shouted. His joy surged, covering the sky and covering the earth. It was like a tsunami, covering his entire body and submerging him. The hunger, thirst, savagery, despair, and madness from before were like a mirage, all of it like a dream. Lan Zhao was in a trance. His eyes turned imperceptibly, and then he saw Zhuang Zhao kneeling in front of him. The dazzling sunlight was blocked by Zhuang Zhao's body. Lan Zhao's head just happened to be in Zhuang Zhao's shadow. Lan Zhao's lips opened and closed. "Brother, what did you say?" Zhuang Zhao's body and mind trembled. He immediately lay in front of Lan Zhao and put his ear to Lan Zhao's mouth. Then he heard an extremely weak voice. I can't take it anymore. Don't drag yourself down for me. There's no food or water. Brother, you just eat me." These words exhausted all of Lan Zhao's strength, and he fainted again. When Zhuang Zhao heard these words, it was as if he had been struck by lightning. His pupils instantly shrank to the size of a needle tip, and his entire body froze. It was as if he had become a stone statue. He stretched his neck, stuck out his ears, and knelt on the ground. His hands were clasped in the sand, and he maintained a twisted and strange posture for a long time. Finally, his blank mind began to slowly turn again. He reacted. He retracted his neck, still half kneeling on the ground, but straightened his upper body. He looked at Lan Zhao, who was lying on the sand, and his vision quickly became blurry. Tears accumulated in his eyes, and then flowed out in large droplets, streaking across his dust-covered face, forming two black tear stains. Brother, brother. He called out loudly. The guilt, annoyance, self-blame, and other emotions in his heart blocked his nose and throat, making it difficult for him to breathe. You're my only family. Me? I won't do that. I won't do that. He was shouting, but it also seemed like he was swearing. Then he put the cyanobacteria on his back again and started his journey again with unsteady steps. With a face full of determination. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.